The text message glowed on my phone screen at 2:37 a.m. I'm staying at Mom's tonight. Don't wait up. I stared at those words, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, fighting the urge to respond. This wasn't the first time Thomas had chosen his mother over me, but something felt different. The finality in those 11 words sent a chill through my body that had nothing to do with the autumn air seeping through our bedroom window. I didn't know it then, but that message would be the beginning of the end, not just of my marriage, but of the woman I used to be. The woman who spent 6 years trying to compete with her mother-in-law for her husband's attention. The woman who believed that if she just tried harder, loved more deeply, or showed more patience, she could fix what was fundamentally broken. Today, 3 years later, I run one of the largest support networks for women dealing with similar situations. We call ourselves the mother-in-law survivors, though we laugh about the name now. But before I tell you about how I help others find their way out of the maze I once wandered, let me take you back to the beginning. Because to understand how I became who I am today, you need to know who I was then. I met Thomas Harrison at a friend's wedding in spring 2015. He was the best man, and I was a bridesmaid. A setup so cliché that we both joked about it during his toast. He was charming, successful, and looked at me like I was the only person in the room. When he asked for my number, I didn't hesitate. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Within 6 months, we were living together, and by the 1-year mark, he had proposed. Everything seemed perfect, except for one small detail I chose to ignore. His relationship with his mother, Margaret. Margaret Harrison was not your typical mother-in-law. She wasn't openly hostile or obviously controlling. Instead, she wielded her influence with surgical precision, using guilt and manipulation so subtle that I often questioned whether I was imagining things. She would call Thomas at all hours, always with some crisis that only he could solve. When we announced our engagement, she ended up in the emergency room with stress-induced chest pains that mysteriously disappeared once Thomas promised to visit her every Sunday. She's just protective, Thomas would say, defending her. Dad's death hit her hard. I understood that losing her husband had been devastating, but what I didn't understand then was how she had transferred all of her emotional needs onto her only son. The wedding planning became a battlefield, though Margaret never once raised her voice or made direct demands. She would just make suggestions, endless suggestions, each one accompanied by a story about family tradition or a reminder of how this would be her only chance to see her son get married. Thomas always sided with her, and I, wanting to be the perfect, understanding wife, gave in time after time. Our wedding day set the tone for what would become our marriage. Margaret had a front row seat at the ceremony, wore white despite my mother's horrified objections, and gave a 20-minute speech at the reception about her 2 special children. I smiled through it all, telling myself that this was normal, that all marriages had their challenges, that things would get better once we settled into our routine. They didn't. The first year of marriage was a series of small surrenders. Thomas and I bought a house just 10 minutes from Margaret's, though we'd initially planned to live in the city. Our Sunday visits became twice-weekly dinners and daily check-ins. Margaret had a key to our house for emergencies, which she used whenever she felt like dropping by, usually when Thomas and I were having a rare moment alone. I tried everything to make it work. I invited Margaret to join us for holidays, planned special mother-son outings, and even suggested she take up a hobby or join a grief support group. But nothing changed. If anything, her hold on Thomas grew stronger. The breaking point came gradually, then all at once. Thomas started spending more nights at his mother's house, claiming she was having anxiety attacks or couldn't be alone. Our intimate moments became increasingly rare, interrupted by Margaret's calls or Thomas's guilt over leaving her alone. When I suggested couples therapy, Thomas accused me of being selfish and unsupportive. "She needs me," he would say, his voice tight with anger. "She's all alone in this world." "What about what I need?" I would ask, but the answer was always in his silence. The night of that final text message, I lay awake until dawn, scrolling through old photos on my phone. There we were on our honeymoon in Hawaii, both smiling, both tanned and happy. There we were at Christmas, Thomas sandwiched between Margaret and me on the couch, his body language already telling a story I hadn't wanted to read. The photos became a timeline of our relationship's decay, each image showing me losing a little more of myself, trying harder to fit into a space that was never meant for me. When Thomas came home the next morning, I was sitting at our kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and the divorce papers I had drawn up months ago but had been too afraid to show him. He didn't look surprised. "Mom thinks this is for the best," he said, and in that moment I realized he'd probably discuss our marriage with her before coming to talk to me. I signed the papers first. The months following our separation were both the hardest and most transformative of my life. I moved out of our house and into a small apartment, taking only what was undeniably mine. The space felt enormous and empty, even though it was half the size of our marital home. The silence was deafening. Initially, I did what many women do after a divorce. I blamed myself. I spent hours analyzing every decision, every argument, every compromise I'd made. I wondered if I'd been too demanding, too jealous, too insecure. I lost weight, couldn't sleep, and found myself crying in inappropriate places: the grocery store, my office bathroom, the gym. But slowly, something began to change. In the quiet of my new life, without the constant drama and tension of competing with Margaret, I started to hear my own voice again. I began journaling, first just to empty my mind of the circular thoughts that kept me awake at night, but then as a way to track my healing. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in relationship trauma and family dynamics. It was Dr. Chen who first helped me understand that what I'd experienced had a name: emotional incest syndrome, also known as covert incest. This is when a parent uses their child as a substitute for an adult relationship, creating an unhealthy emotional dependency that affects the child's ability to form healthy romantic relationships. "What happened wasn't your fault," Dr. Chen told me during one particularly difficult session. "You were trying to compete with a relationship that was established long before you came into the picture. It's like trying to win a race that was rigged from the start." Those words were the key that unlocked something in me. I began researching, reading everything I could find about emotional incest and its effects on marriages. I joined online support groups and was shocked to discover how many women had stories similar to mine. Some had fought this battle for decades, losing pieces of themselves year by year. Others had children who were now caught in the same toxic dynamic. The more I learned, the more I realized that this wasn't just about me anymore. There was a pattern here, a societal issue that needed to be addressed. Women needed to know they weren't alone, that they weren't crazy for feeling the way they did, and most importantly, that they had options. One night, unable to sleep, I started a blog. I called it Breaking Free: Stories of Survival and Growth. In my first post, I shared my story, all of it, raw and unfiltered. I wrote about the red flags I'd ignored, the compromises that had eroded my self-worth, and the moment I finally chose myself. The response was overwhelming. Within days, my inbox was flooded with messages from women around the world. They shared their stories, their pain, their fears, and their hopes. Many had never told anyone what they were going through, ashamed to admit that they were losing to their mother-in-law or afraid of being judged for not making their marriage work. I responded to every message, staying up late into the night, sharing resources, offering support, and sometimes just listening. As the community grew, I realized we needed more than just a blog. We needed a comprehensive support system. That's how Mother-in-Law Survivors was born. What started as a simple blog evolved into a multifaceted support network. We now have weekly online support groups, a resource library of articles and books, partnerships with family therapists who understand our unique challenges, and an emergency hotline for women in crisis. We also offer practical assistance, everything from legal referrals to temporary housing solutions for women who need to leave their situations quickly. Our network of volunteers includes financial advisors, career counselors, and mental health professionals who donate their time to help women rebuild their lives. But perhaps most importantly, we offer hope. Hope that there is life after this kind of betrayal. Hope that you can rebuild yourself stronger and wiser than before. Hope that you are worthy of love that doesn't require you to compromise your dignity or sense of self. Today, my life looks nothing like I imagined it would when I walked down the aisle 8 years ago. I'm not a wife anymore, but I am a leader, a mentor, and an advocate. I've helped hundreds of women recognize their worth and find the strength to choose themselves. Last month, I received a wedding invitation from Thomas. He's marrying again, a woman 10 years younger than me. Part of me wanted to reach out, to warn her about what she's walking into. But I know that's not my role. Instead, I added her to our confidential watch list. a service we provide to track potential cases and offer support when needed. Margaret, I heard, still lives 10 minutes away from Thomas. She's already announced that she's selling her house to move in with them after the wedding to help with any future grandchildren. History, as they say, repeats itself. But that's not my story anymore. My story is about breaking cycles, about turning pain into purpose, about helping other women write their own endings. Every time I get a message from a woman who's found the courage to set boundaries, every time I see someone in our support group offering encouragement to a newcomer, every time I hear about a successful transition to independence, I know that my experience had a purpose. Through my work with mother-in-law survivors, I've identified several key patterns and lessons that I share with every woman who comes to us for help. 1. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong in your relationship, it probably is. Those early warning signs I ignored. They were my intuition trying to protect me. 2. You can't fix someone else's family dynamics. The problems between Thomas and his mother existed long before I came into the picture, and they would have continued regardless of what I did. 3. Love shouldn't require constant sacrifice. If you're always the one compromising, always the one trying harder, always the one giving up pieces of yourself, it's not a healthy relationship. 4. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for your mental and emotional health. You have the right to protect your space, your time, and your relationship. 5. You are not responsible for someone else's happiness. This applies to both your partner and their family members. 3 years after that late-night text message, I can honestly say I'm grateful for my experience, not because it was easy or because I enjoy seeing others go through similar situations, but because it led me to my true purpose. Every day, I work with women who are just beginning their journey to self-discovery and healing. I see myself in their tear-filled eyes and trembling voices. I recognize their fear, their uncertainty, their desperate need to believe that they can make things work if they just try harder. And every day, I get to tell them what I wish someone had told me. You are stronger than you know, and you deserve more than this. Our organization continues to grow. We're currently developing a preventive education program for premarital counselors and wedding planners, helping them identify and address potential red flags before couples commit to marriage. We're also working on a documentary series that will share stories of survival and transformation, bringing these often hidden struggles into the light. But perhaps our most important work happens in the quiet moments, in late-night phone calls with women who feel alone and scared, in support group meetings where tears turn to laughter, in the small victories of women learning to put themselves first, often for the first time in their lives. Last week, I received a card from a woman named Claire, one of the first members of our support group. She had just celebrated 1 year of independence after leaving a situation similar to mine. Inside the card was a quote that now hangs in my office. Sometimes the happiest ending isn't the one you keep wishing for, but something you never thought to dream of. Those words sum up my journey perfectly. I never dreamed that my failed marriage would lead me to help other women find their strength. I never imagined that my pain would become a beacon of hope for others. I never thought I would be grateful for one of the most difficult experiences of my life. But here I am, stronger than ever, surrounded by a community of warriors who refuse to be silenced or diminished. We are the mother-in-law survivors, and we are rewriting our stories one page at a time. To any woman reading this who sees herself in my story, know this. You are not alone. You are not crazy. And you have options. Whether you choose to stay and fight for your relationship or leave to save yourself, there is a community waiting to support you. Your story isn't over. In fact, it might just be beginning. As I write this, sitting in my office overlooking the city I once thought I'd never live in, I can't help but smile at life's unexpected turns. On my desk are dozens of letters from women we've helped, each one a reminder of why this work matters. Next to them is a photo of our latest support group graduation ceremony, 15 women, all standing tall, all smiling, all ready to begin their new lives. Tomorrow, I'll lead another workshop, share more resources, answer more calls. I'll listen to more stories of women finding their voice, setting boundaries, choosing themselves. And I'll remember that text message from 3 years ago, the one that felt like an ending but turned out to be just the beginning. Because sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can lead you to the best version of yourself. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted opens the door to everything you were meant to have. Sometimes, just sometimes, your broken heart can help heal others. And that, I've learned, is the most beautiful plot twist of all. Epilogue. To Thomas, if you ever read this. Thank you, not for leaving, but for forcing me to find my strength. Thank you for showing me what I didn't want, so I could discover what I truly needed. Your mother still sends me Christmas cards, believe it or not. I don't open them anymore, but I keep them as reminders of how far I've come. To every woman who has ever felt like she was losing herself in someone else's story, your life is your own. Your happiness matters. Your dreams count. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. And to Margaret, I hope you find peace. I hope you learn to let go, but most of all, I hope your new daughter-in-law finds us before she needs us.
Jack could not adjust to civilian life. Who would have thought that, after surviving the conflicts abroad, he would end up as a mere bodyguard for the wealthy? His shrapnel wound had dealt him a cruel hand. A brave officer, he bore a scar resembling a burgundy rose with blue veins. He was deeply embarrassed by this mark and hesitated to be intimate with any woman. Besides, he loved only one woman, and she was married and devoted to her husband. Jack finished his shift, hung his uniform in the locker, and reported to his father that he had completed his duties. His father, a retired police officer, now headed the security service for a childhood friend, and Jack escorted his daughter, with whom he played a lot of times together in their childhood. Yet there weren't many outings. Sometimes they visited her father's company, her beauty salon, a friend's party, a fashion exhibition, or her father's house. Brenda spent most of her time alone in her vast home. She loved gardening, spent hours in the pool, and diligently read books in the gazebo or by the fireplace in winter. Jack couldn't understand such family dynamics. What kind of couple lived separately most of the time? But no one asked for his opinion, so he dutifully performed his duties and remained loyal to his employer. Darren Stroman, Brenda's father, was a legendary figure in the city. He was an intelligent but extremely stern man. His only joy was his beloved daughter Brenda, who was the spitting image of the woman who had died during childbirth and meant everything to Mr. Stroman. Mr. Stroman was inconsolable, but a week later they placed a tiny, sniffling bundle in his arms. The baby opened her eyes and looked at him intently. Mr. Stroman's heart did a somersault. He looked up to the sky and said, "Beloved, I will do everything to ensure our daughter grows up healthy and happy. I will dedicate my life to this little one who lost her mother so early. I will be both a father and mother to her." And he kept his word. Father and daughter were extraordinarily close. Only in her company did his heart soften. He never remarried, choosing women only for brief periods. After his wife's death, he threw himself into the business. A chemist by training, he spent all day at the laboratory. Later, he led his team. Using his knowledge and investment, he found a small chemical company, which soon became a giant in the market. Sometimes Darren Stroman himself thought that the rapid growth of income, the smiles of fortune, all this was given to him from above as compensation for enduring the greatest loss in his life stoically. Heaven now paid him a kind of compensation for moral damages. Business was booming. Over several decades, when his small firm had grown into a solid holding company, Darren Stroman had hardened. He became arrogant, kept everyone at a distance, stopped trusting people indiscriminately. His position demanded it. He literally covered himself with this ironclad armour, shutting himself off from the world. He lived only for Brenda and his company. So everything seemed to be going smoothly for Mr. Stroman until misfortune knocked on his door again, dark and inevitable. Brenda fell seriously ill. By that time, she had been happily married to Colin for 8 years. She had fallen in love with him at first sight, the moment her bodyguards turned away slightly. Why were there bodyguards everywhere? The reason was basic. During those tumultuous 90s, During those tumultuous 90s, Darren Stroman refused to give in to the demands of a criminal gang. He was firmly convinced that he should not share his profits with anyone except state. Such defiance did not sit well with the gangsters, and they crudely attacked the car in which Mr. Stroman and his daughter were travelling to an entertainment centre. At that time, he did not have a reliable security service. Only a driver accompanied them. The result was a scare for the girl, several bullet holes in the upholstery, and a ruined mood. Mr. Stroman was not easily intimidated. He arranged a meeting with the right people and somehow reached an agreement. Since then, Brenda always left the house accompanied by her bodyguard. That's how her childhood and youth passed. That's why everyone avoided her at the university, except for Colin. He bravely sat next to her at a seminar. And then, unheard of, he suggested they skip class, leaving through the back staircase. What an exhilarating adventure it was! They managed to eat their fill of ice cream, go to the movies, and return in time for the last class. Brenda had never experienced such an exciting day. She became instantly and irrevocably attached to Colin. They became marvellously skilled at confusing the guard, and thanks to this, they watched all the movies at the nearest cinema, skipped classes to go to the city beach, and explored all the cafes and pastry shops in the area. They both passed their exams with much lower grades than usual, skipping too many classes. So it wasn't surprising that, looking at all this, Mr. Stroman sat his now new and incomprehensible daughter in a chair and asked, "Is there something I don't know, Brenda? You've changed so much. Your eyes are shining, you're smiling. I get the feeling you're not even listening to me now. You're lost in the clouds somewhere." Brenda jumped up from her chair, wrapped her arms around her father's neck and declared, "You know, Daddy, I'm in love. I know for sure that he is the one destined for me by fate." Mr. Stroman tried to cool her enthusiasm slightly. "Are you planning to introduce us? And when did you even find the time to meet the man of your life? You're always at your classes. Or am I mistaken?" Brenda joyfully twirled around the room. "Colin and I sit together in all the lectures and seminars. We go to the cafeteria during breaks. We've been inseparable for months now. Thankfully, we're in the same group. Only our foreign language classes are different. Daddy, when can I invite Colin over for dinner? Or maybe even for lunch on a weekend? You'll instruct the chefs to do their best, won't you?" Brenda's voice rang with such happiness that Darren immediately understood. His girl was truly in love, heart and soul. All that remained was to meet the object of her affection and have his security service thoroughly investigate the young man. What did he want from his daughter? What were his intentions? His people knew how to scrutinize an individual meticulously. Colin's background revealed no dark spots. He came from a simple middle-class family and was an only child who received all his parents' love. His record was straightforward: kindergarten, school, university. No blemishes. Mr. Stroman considered the situation from all angles. The young man seemed decent, and Brenda was head over heels in love with him. Let them submit their application to the registry office, since Colin kept hinting at marriage to his beloved. Even Colin's visit to their home did not change Mr. Stroman's opinion. He was cultured, polite, attentive to his girlfriend and the elder generation. The wedding was set for the upcoming summer. As a wedding gift, the man gave the young couple a beautiful house with a plot of land. However, the father's views on security matters remained unchanged. A reliable bodyguard was assigned to Colin to keep a close eye on the new son-in-law. Brenda also continued to go nowhere without her escort. The married life of the loving couple flowed smoothly. A couple of years passed carefree and joyful. Now Colin was not shy about spending his wife's money, as he had been at the beginning of their relationship. He grew accustomed to expensive clothes, foreign resorts, servants in the house, and the prestigious car Brenda had given him for his birthday. Mr. Stroman viewed his son-in-law's innocent pleasures indulgently. After graduating, Colin and Brenda started working in the legal department of the family company. They mutually decided not to think about children for now. Their plans included seeing more of the world and advancing in their careers. Lately, Colin increasingly prioritised the latter. He received his first promotion and began travelling frequently on interesting business trips to the mining sites. He learned to evade surveillance, as he called the constant presence of his bodyguard. Brenda quickly began to lose the interest in her position as a lawyer. She honestly told her father, "Daddy, I earned this degree mainly because you wanted me to have a solid education. Please forgive me, but this is not my calling. I am a creative person by nature, and I'm drawn to literature, or more precisely journalism." Mr. Stroman was enthusiastic. "Do you want to get another education, Brenda? I see no obstacles. Let's find out tomorrow what documents are required." But the young woman shook her head. "I want to give Colin a child, so that part of him is always with me while he's away on his business trips." "Does his work schedule bother you?" her father immediately asked. "That can easily be adjusted. I'll give the appropriate orders right away." "No, Daddy, don't. There's no need to clip his wings. Colin loves being at the centre of events, solving legal puzzles. I've already found a solution for my plans. With your permission, I'd like to leave the legal department and start writing, working from home remotely. Is that possible?" "For my daughter, anything is possible in the company, despite my strictness with employees. Proceed with your plans." After this conversation, Brenda happily settled at home, dividing her time between her luxurious garden flowers and writing articles. Colin, now less frequently present in these walls, usually found his wife in a state of euphoria, able to rejoice in small victories, even if it was just a charming bush with tiny blue roses. They began to drift apart almost imperceptibly. Conversations over dinner became scarce, and they no longer rushed to the bedroom. Even the once endlessly lovesick Brenda was not bothered by this fact. After a quick dinner, she would return to her computer, while Colin would bury himself in his phone or lazily watch football on TV. Their rare attempts to conceive a child continued to fail. A year passed, and then another. Brenda began to wonder. She had been together with Colin for 6 years, but they now resembled close friends more than the passionate lovers they once were. Only during their trips, perhaps on tropical islands, did their former feelings reignite, fueled by the romantic atmosphere. After returning from one such trip, Brenda decided to address the issue head-on. "Darling, don't you think we should both get checked out? We've been together for so many years, but I still haven't been able to have a child. After our return, will you go on another business trip, or can you visit the medical centre with me?" Colin froze. He knew for certain that there was nothing wrong with him. Far away in a distant state, he had started a second family, where a rosy-cheeked toddler, his son, was growing up. Colin had mastered the art of evading his security detail. During one of his business trips, a couple of years ago, he met another woman. Unlike Brenda, more down-to-earth. Colin was not ready to lose the opportunities that came with being married to a very wealthy woman. Fortunately, his father-in-law and wife never monitored his expenses. The income of a successful lawyer in a large company was more than enough to support that woman and their child. Colin was content with his arrangement. He was not frightened by his double life, nor was he burdened by guilt. Many men did the same. Why should he be any different? Of course, Colin did not reveal any of this to Brenda. Instead, he assured her, "Schedule us for any time convenient for you. I'll try my best. Just keep in mind that I have already had 2 business trips planned for the next month. We need to coordinate the doctor's appointment with my work schedule." The examination at the clinic was a shock for Brenda and Mr. Stroman. The doctors unanimously agreed that the young woman showed all the signs of rapidly progressing renal failure. Her electrolyte and nitrogen metabolism were disrupted. They were astonished that Brenda felt no symptoms. She honestly tried to recall anything that might indicate illness, but all she could remember were 3 days on a tropical island when she felt chilled despite the heat. She had a fever and felt unwell. The medical facility suggested that she might have contracted a hemorrhagic fever and not realized it. The virus had taken hold in her body, causing damage to her blood vessels and gaining strength and momentum. Brenda was admitted to the clinic, to the intensive care unit. Mr. Stroman assured the doctors that he was willing to spare no expense. As for Colin, he did not go on his business trips, leaving his wife to doctor's care. And there was constant bustle and activity around Brenda, and the course of treatment seemed to take effect. The doctors were confident that they had diagnosed the condition in time and had fully suppressed the infection. Brenda was discharged from the clinic, seemingly healthy, according to all the tests, but somehow different, barely resembling her former self. However, the evil fate was relentless, but Brenda did not know it yet. Jack knew nothing of these misfortunes related to Brenda's illness. After retiring from military service, he first had to recover from his injury, then struggled to find work, and finally ended up as Brenda's bodyguard. To his shock, he found a sickly, withdrawn creature instead of the woman he had loved since childhood. Her husband, Colin, was always away on business trips. Her father often visited, but did not stay overnight, and Brenda was left alone in the large house with the maid and cook. Jack suffered, unable to bear seeing Brenda waste away, battling constant nausea and pain. He was aware that now she did not remember their brief shared childhood. It was the time when her father was not yet so wealthy. His father was just graduating from police college, and their families were just good neighbours. Little Jack would look at the girl with huge blue eyes, and even then he knew that he always had to protect her from all the evils of life, to be her knight. When Jack's father finished police college, his first assignment was to a town near their city, so the bond between the two friends, his and Brenda's fathers, continued. For young Jack, there was no greater joy than waiting for Brenda's visit. After enjoying his mother's pies and taking a plate of new sweets and apples, the pair of friends would go to Jack's room to play. Those were the most magical moments. Brenda, already an excellent reader, would flip through books of fairy tales, and they would munch on apples and chocolate treats together. Even then, Mr. Stroman was starting to earn good money. When visiting them, he would bring bags full of rare delicacies. Perhaps no magical era can last forever. Jack's father, along with the rank of senior lieutenant, received a new assignment to a promising position in distant lands. The two close families were forced to part ways for many years. Jack was devastated by such injustice. His first love remained in their homeland, while he was leaving for the unknown. Although later there were occasional mutual winter or summer vacations, brief visits to Mr. Stroman's house, when Brenda's father would instruct the bodyguards to accompany the two teenagers to the circus, cinema or park. But Brenda at that time was always engrossed in books. She would grab Jack's hand, shake him, rush somewhere, or stand silently in front of another printed edition. She constantly puzzled Jack with her unpredictable behaviour. She was a hopeless dreamer. Sometimes she would completely forget that she was not alone in the park, and Jack loved this awkward girl, with thin shoulders and the same impossible blue eyes as in childhood. She had no idea about his feelings then, and she did not know about them now. Why bother her soul when she was already married and so seriously ill. Jack never even hoped that fate would bring them together as a couple. He served her loyally and silently, considering it his destiny. On that day, it happened that almost all the servants in the house had errands outside its walls. Brenda was trying to write something in the gazebo on her computer, but she felt nauseous again, and the pain was almost unbearable, even after taking her medication. She already knew that the infection had not been eliminated. It had only slowed down, gripping her with a deadly hold. It was relentlessly leading her to renal failure, for some reason not affecting her other organs. It was as if the infection had chosen a single target, slowly but meticulously attacking Brenda. Mr. Stroman mobilized all his connections, promising any reward to anyone who could help rid her of this affliction. And one promising solution was found: to find a donor who would share one of their kidneys with Brenda. But even here, there was a catch. Mr. Stroman immediately took all the tests and turned out to be an unsuitable candidate for his daughter in this regard. They were physiologically incompatible for such an operation. Mr. Stroman tripled the reward to astronomical heights. Colleagues of the patron, strangers from the medical records, all his bodyguards, even a business partner who had lost his son and wanted to help, took the tests. All were unsuitable. Reluctantly, Colin also underwent the examination. To his relief, he was not a suitable donor, but he managed to display his devotion and love. Mr. Stroman was pleased with his enthusiasm, and Brenda was so tired of all these experiments that she almost gave in to the inevitable. She knew her days were numbered. She shared this with the seemingly deeply grieving Colin, who, after hearing this news, did not go on business trips for a month. He stayed home with her, but this brought no relief. When he finally left, Brenda crossed herself. She vividly remembered a phrase she had once come across in a woman's magazine: "A sickly wife is not good for life." She clung so tightly to these words, drumming them into her head, that in Colin's presence she turned into a stoic tin soldier. She secretly took handfuls of pills when he wasn't looking, and engaged in a flurry of activity around the house. Jack observed all her efforts during his shifts and was deeply troubled, constantly thinking, "I could never forget her all these years. And she loves her husband so much that she would never even look in my direction. Well, I don't need any other woman anyway. I will be with her to the end, even as her bodyguard." Even now, after patrolling the perimeter of the house, he decided to check on Brenda in the gazebo. She was pale, holding her hand to her mouth, and he immediately understood that she was feeling nauseous. She gestured for him to leave, embarrassed, not wanting him to see her in such a pitiful state. But he did not leave. Even later, he could not explain what came over him. He suddenly lifted the flaps of his service jacket, revealing a grotesque reddish scar of considerable size on his right side. "Brenda, no one but my parents and doctors have seen this disfigurement. Now I have shown you what embarrasses me the most in life. I trust you because I believe that friendship has no expiration date. We have known each other since childhood, even if you don't remember it. Allow me to be by your side, like when we used to steal candles and apples from the bowl, and you read me fairy tales. A person must have a friend they can trust unconditionally. I want to be that friend for you." Jack wanted to add something more. At that moment, Brenda felt even worse. She rushed to the toilet, but it was too late. She had to resort to the bushes nearby. She nodded to Jack to leave as she ran, but he did not think to do so. A couple of minutes later, he stood calmly beside her with a clean bowl and a jug of water. Brenda felt very ill, but she suddenly remembered Colin, who during her bouts of vomiting would demonstratively close the bathroom door to block out any sounds. Meanwhile, Jack poured water from the jug onto the towel and wiped Brenda's face before offering his hand to lead her back to the gazebo. Seating her on the sofa, he looked into her eyes. "We didn't finish our conversation, Brenda. Think about my offer. I will be anything for you. An assistant, a confidant, a companion, your shadow. It's not right that you spend so much time alone." Brenda had no strength to respond or think about anything. The seizure had taken all her energy. When her father visited that evening, Brenda agreed to another hospitalization. Jack insisted on guarding her room. Who knows what might happen? It was better not to have strangers bothering her. Mr. Stroman surprisingly agreed. Now Jack could be by his beloved's side all day. He protested when someone else from the security team replaced him late in the evening. Gradually, Jack grew a bit bolder. He started visiting Brenda in her room, and they talked a lot. He even began to feel that she was a little better, that he was distracting her from the constant pain. Mr. Stroman usually appeared in the evening. He sat with his daughter for a long time, not knowing what else to do. The situation with the donor was not improving. Everyone who tried to profit from someone else's misfortune or help was still not a match. As for Colin, he spent all his time on his endless business trips. Surprisingly, his presence, for some reason, now only irritated Brenda. There was something ostentatious about his care. It seemed like he was putting on a mask and enduring his sick wife, who was no longer of any use to him. Though Mr. Stroman had arranged a hospital room for his daughter, that was far from resembling a typical ward. The setting was luxurious, with functional furniture chosen for comfort. Besides the double bed, there were several soft sofas and armchairs, a spacious bathroom with a tropical shower, a jacuzzi, and rows of elite cosmetics. A television occupied almost an entire wall. There was a workspace if Brenda wanted to write something. The refrigerator was stocked with the freshest products. Vases with live flowers, replaced daily with new bouquets, were everywhere. Mr. Stroman stroked Brenda's hand, where an IV needle was inserted, and thought painfully, this horrible feeling of helplessness when you can give your loved one almost anything, but it still won't save them. What else could he do? Watch as the most precious thing in the world slips away? Leaves him, as his beloved wife once did. One more second, and he would burst into tears, wail aloud. He couldn't let Brenda see him like that. He kept telling her that she would recover, that soon someone would give her life for many more years. But after every visit to a sick Brenda, Mr. Stroman felt like a deeply old man, someone to whom everything was utterly indifferent. After his leaving, Brenda said to Jack, "Dad has completely given up. I can't bear to see it. He can't accept what's happening. He's afraid for me, doesn't want to face reality." Peeling an orange for Brenda, Jack turned to her. "I don't like to be hypocritical or lie, Brenda. Your situation is truly terrible. Now, I'll tell you something. Promise you won't be angry with me for my boldness. I had a dream. You, me, and a little girl. The dream was fantastically vivid. We were all riding a carousel in an amusement park. Then, for some reason, we were eating hot dogs in a cafe, joking and laughing. That girl was your exact copy. I'm not a psychic, not a fortune teller, but it was after this dream that I understood a miracle will happen. Ours, together. You will recover. We will be together. We will have a daughter, just as beautiful as you." Brenda smiled weakly for the first time in many days. And what about the small detail named Colin? Shall we send him to the scrapyard? Jack couldn't believe his ears. Brenda was joking so boldly about her husband. It was impossible. A loving man can be weak and unrestrained. So Jack took Brenda's words as some form of encouragement. In 2 quick steps, he was by the sofa where the young woman sat and pressed his lips to hers. Brenda did not chase him away, but merely noted, "Your lips smell like oranges. Were you peeling the tropical fruit or eating it?" Jack exhaled, afraid that Brenda would be furious at his actions, and explained, "I tried one slice to make sure the orange wasn't too sour for you. I have to protect you from everything." Outside, dusk was falling. Brenda suddenly grew sad. "You'll have to leave for your shift soon. I'll be alone again. Tomorrow Colin is coming. He promised to visit. It's so strange. I don't want to see him at all. He belongs to my past life, and you are here with me in this horrible real one. The world changes, sometimes unexpectedly." Jack looked at Brenda with hope. "I can call my colleague right now, make something up and stay. I'll be the guard at your door." Brenda smiled weakly again. "All right, but only on one condition. I have nothing left to lose. Will you come to me tonight and warm me?" Jack thought he must be dreaming. To be with her? With Brenda? It couldn't be true. Aloud he said, "I'd follow you into fire or water, Brenda." Jack wondered about the reason behind Brenda's proposal. There was something desperate about it, driven by an unnatural desire, something entirely different, and he wanted to know what it was. Jack's partner agreed to cover his shift without complaint, even glad he didn't have to travel across the city. Jack could have gone to Brenda's ward immediately, but he delayed the moment. He took a long shower, then he shaved meticulously, returned to his chair outside Brenda's door, but still hesitated to enter. He might have stayed there for a long time, but then Brenda peeked out the door and asked calmly, "Have you changed your mind? I'll understand if you have. I'm not much of an object of male attention right now. Just tell me straight, I won't be offended." And Jack stepped forward, entering the warm, orange-scented room. Behind him, he left his post at the door, and years of thoughts about Brenda. He could never have dreamed he would be so close to her. He still couldn't believe the reality of what was happening. Then came their night, memorable to both for its endless tenderness and warmth. Jack was with the woman who meant more to him than life itself. Brenda experienced how a man who would do anything for her could love. Early in the morning they finally fell asleep. Their secret was saved only by Jack's incredibly keen hearing and his ability to leap into action in seconds under extreme conditions. "Brenda dear, it's me, your husband. Why did you lock yourself in? I came straight from the airport to see you," they heard behind the door. Jack gently roused his beloved and nodded toward the door, where Colin continued to knock. Brenda calmly pointed to the large wardrobe, where Jack could hide. He felt uncomfortable in this situation, but there was nothing he could do. He couldn't put Brenda in an awkward position. Meanwhile, Brenda slowly got up and, tiptoeing to the door, opened it. "Colin, I'm sorry. I feel so terrible. I don't think I have much time left. I could barely get up to open the door for you. I closed it so no one would bother me. And I didn't expect you so early. I haven't even freshened up." Colin kissed her cheek dryly and frowned. "Go lie down. You should get some more sleep. You don't look well. I'll sit quietly in the chair and go through some papers." Brenda obeyed, lying back down on the bed and pulling the blanket up to her chin. The room fell silent, interrupted only by the occasional rustle of papers that Colin was handling. Half an hour passed like this. Jack, in the wardrobe, tried to stay almost motionless and keeping his cell phone in his hands. Then suddenly, Colin rose from his seat with a smirk and approached Brenda's bed, leaning over the sleeping woman. Jack couldn't explain why he pressed the record button on his phone screen. He had a feeling that something significant, important for his beloved, was about to happen. Meanwhile, Colin, clearly and intelligibly, whispered in a rustling whisper, "You're asleep again. How tired I am of you, my dear. I could even say you disgust me. I've been hiding behind your father's back, cloaking myself in his prosperity. I specifically pursued you in university, knowing your father was a wealthy man. Now I can shed these shackles. I've been offered a job in a town where my real, genuine family lives. There my beloved son is growing up, and my true love awaits me. You won't live much longer anyway, and I'm tired of keeping up appearances, pretending to fit in to high society, seeking your father's approval. Your heart will stop beating soon. How I've longed for this! How I've dreamed of being rid of you!" Colin didn't get to say anything more. He sprawled on the floor from a powerful blow. People were already rushing down the corridor toward the noise. Something crunched, something shattered in the room. Besides the unconscious Colin's head lay 2 pearly white teeth and a pool of blood spread out. He was unconscious, but a sinister smile remained frozen on his face. Brenda jumped out of bed and embraced Jack. "I heard everything, my dear. It turns out this scoundrel never loved me, but now I won't feel so bitter about leaving. I've met you. However many days we have left together, they will be my happiness." Jack himself called Mr. Stroman, dryly reporting, "There's been an incident at the hospital. It would be better if you came in person. Don't worry, Brenda is fine, but the situation requires your presence." The father appeared at the hospital half an hour later. He quickly assessed the situation, listened to the recordings from Jack's phone, and embraced Brenda, who was clinging to Jack. "This scuffle in the clinic will not be made public. Thank you, Jack, for being with her in this difficult hour." Mr. Stroman walked down the corridor crying. It wasn't hysteria. Tears just streamed down his face, and he couldn't stop them. He had taken Jack out of the room for now, promising Brenda he would return him to his post by evening. He didn't ask them anything. With some inner sense, he immediately understood that this man, now following him, truly loved his daughter. How much time she had wasted on the other one, that worthless man, unworthy of his girl's love. How cruel fate could be. A person finally finds happiness only to have to leave forever. No, he wouldn't allow it. His Brenda would live at any cost, by any miracle. Walter checked his skate laces again and smiled to himself. Who would have thought? A grown man drawn to the ice. It was all because of his rambunctious boys, who had dreamed of joining the hockey section since they were toddlers. Walter and his wife Pat teased their twin boys, calling them the 2 acrobat brothers. The boys were born athletic and coordinated. While other children played in the sandbox, they were always on the playground's mini exercise bars, spinning and twirling like little monkeys. The whole family, Walter, Pat and their twins, lived harmoniously. Walter had a tough childhood and a difficult youth. He wanted his sons to have a better life and know that they had a father who loved them. His mother, a beautiful woman with a boundless need of love, had a constant open door for men. Walter remembered her state as she awaited the arrival of each new suitor. She would order him out of the house. "Walter, go take a walk for a couple of hours. I have some business to attend to." Walter would obediently dress and disappear, wandering aimlessly across the city. At first he spent his time in the library's reading room. Later he joined a basketball section. His mother wasn't an antisocial person. She wasn't cruel or harsh, and he always went to kindergarten and school clean and well-groomed, never hungry. There was always a plate of porridge with butter at home, and the fridge was stocked with vegetables. Nevertheless, they lived impoverished. His mother spent too much on entertaining her lovers, drinking and constant feasts with similarly carefree friends. She was perpetually searching for the man of her life and always looked past her son, as if the shadow of another potential suitor was already looming behind him. Heavily made up, reeking of sweet perfume and stale alcohol. Cheerful, promiscuous, always ready for a good time, as the neighbours in the apartment building whispered about her. She was like a bright star that flashed through his life. She left when he was only 19. She didn't like it when little Walter asked about his father. He only started doing this when he was older, in high school. She would say, "We don't need anything from your father. I never took a penny from him, and I won't start now. I wouldn't have even had you if the doctor at the women's clinic hadn't scared me. You'll have a real father some day. I'll give you a little brother or sister, but only if I'm legally married." Official marriage was her fixation. But who would marry a woman like her? Why bother? There were no barriers. Men could come and go as they pleased, taking advantage of her generosity. His mother's cancer was detected too late. She underwent a few surgeries, but it didn't help. The metastasis continued to spread through her body. All her suitors vanished instantly. Walter took on all the burdens and cared for his mother. He learned to give injections, change dressings, and sense when pain relief was needed. He stayed by her side until her final breath, and in the end his mother's heart wavered. She asked for a piece of paper and a pen. "I want to tell you who your father is. He's a big shot in our country now. I saw his photo in some business journal in the hospital. Write this down. Son, his name is Darren Stroman. Do with this information what you will. Throw away the paper or use it. He's got more money than he knows what to do with. Maybe he won't mind helping you." In response to her confession, Walter only muttered, "I've never gone grovelling to anyone, and I won't start now. I'll succeed on my own." After graduating, Walter found a place in a brigade of workers responsible for the road markings. The men in the brigade were all good people. They welcomed the newcomer like family. Walter quickly mastered the art of taming roads and creating proper road markings. He also tried related jobs, such as installing road signs and repairing traffic lights. His salary was not astronomical, but it was enough to live on. At first he was exhausted from the sheer number of impressions. In the evenings he would buy pizza, satisfy his appetite, and fall asleep to the hum of the television. And so Walter's life might have continued in this vein, but fate decided to intervene. The brigade supervisor's daughter stopped by after classes to drop off the glasses her father had forgotten at home. Walter and Pat only needed to glance at each other once, and that was it. He followed her to the bus stop like a donkey after a carrot to see her off. She immediately wrote her phone number on a scrap of paper for him. Two halves of a whole sometimes meet like that, by chance, on an ordinary day, without even dreaming of such happiness. Sometimes Walter thought that Pat was given to him to make up for everything he had lacked before. She was so kind, warm and loving that she immediately became his whole world. They dated for only a couple of months before submitting their marriage application. Pat transformed his apartment, left in disarray after his mother's escapades, into a cosy home. A minor cosmetic renovation with new wallpaper, cheerful curtains, blankets on the chairs, bedspreads and tablecloths made all the difference. They both found joy in simple pleasures and delighted in small victories. And when they found out they were expecting, their happiness doubled. They were having twins. Walter and Pat couldn't believe their luck. 2 sons, their beloved little babies. The boys grew up healthy and lively, sometimes mischievous, but that's what kids do. Their desire to play hockey was fully supported. The coach even said they were perfect candidates for the section. Time passed, and life in their loving family flowed smoothly. That day started with an inner restlessness, a sense of anxiety. Walter dropped his sons off at their sports complex and decided to skate a bit at the nearby rink to shake off the negativity. He had always enjoyed sports but never made it his profession. Basketball coaches and fellow swimmers admired his physique, but he saw sports as a way to relax and cope with stress. But today, his training session didn't bring the usual relief. Walter decided to wait for his boys in the fitness bar. He ordered a tea and sat in front of a large plasma screen, displaying ads. His thoughts were scattered. Christmas is coming. I need to get the money from our stash for gifts. Pat has been eyeing those pearl earrings. The boys could use new hockey sticks. I should make their wishes come true. We'll celebrate at home, of course. His thoughts were interrupted by a news anchor announcing that a prominent local man, Darren Stroman, had a message for the viewers. A man who seemed vaguely familiar appeared on the screen. He started speaking. Dear viewers, I am addressing you in a moment of complete despair. My only daughter needs a kidney donor. We haven't been able to find a compatible match, but I haven't lost hope. The reward will be substantial. But for more details, please visit my company's website. The broadcast returned to pre-New Year's ads with skating snowflakes. The world continued preparing for winter wonders, indifferent to the desperate father's plea. Walter checked his feelings. No, he felt no malice towards his biological father or his half-sister. He didn't seek revenge or wish them harm. He returned home thoughtful, which didn't escape Pat's notice. What's wrong, dear? You're not yourself, she asked. Walter frowned. Remember I once told you who my father is? He's in big trouble, so big that it's on TV. It's serious and most likely hopeless. Pat knew her husband well. She loved him more than life itself and understood him implicitly. She asked the right question. How can we help him? Walter explained the situation with his half-sister needing a kidney donor. Pat didn't protest or show any distress. Instead, she asked, Do you think you might be a match? Have you considered that living with one kidney will have certain restrictions? You'd have to give up alcohol, active sports, and your favourite fast food. Walter remained silent, not reacting to her words. You're going to try anyway, aren't you? Pat asked softly. Yes, it's decided. I'm sorry, but I can't do otherwise. Walter spent the entire next day at the clinic. A couple of days later it became clear that he was an ideal match for Brenda. He didn't hesitate for a moment. As he left the hospital, he said only one thing. Tell Mr. Stroman that I refuse the reward for the operation. I will only agree to his covering the costs of the procedure and my subsequent rehabilitation. This is my condition. Otherwise, there will be no deal. Mr. Stroman sat in the gazebo. The past 2 months had been extremely challenging emotionally. Just as he had lost all hope, the clinic called. They informed him that a suitable donor had been found. The transplant would take place in 3 days. Mr. Stroman understood that his daughter would not be perfectly healthy. Moreover, the doctors warned him that they could only guarantee her 10 to 15 years after the transplant. And besides, it might not be fully accepted, and there could be complications. From this disjointed monologue by the attending physician, Mr. Stroman grasped the main point. Brenda would live. This could last more than 10 years. During this time, medicine would undoubtedly advance. A new solution to extend his daughter's life further would be found. At this moment, the head of his security service appeared before him with a report. "You asked me to find out if the donor and Ms. White are namesakes or relatives, and I have some very interesting news for you. Yes, Walter is the son of Ms. White, whom you knew when you were young. In fact, I took a DNA test, and there's a 99% chance he's your son. His perfect match with Brenda is not a coincidence." After a long silence, Mr. Stroman asked only one thing. "Have you compiled a full dossier on my son? Is everything indicated in detail here?" "Undoubtedly," reported the man. He was already prepared and about to leave, his report complete, but Mr. Stroman stopped him with a gesture and added, "By the way, tell Jack that he can continue his relationship with Brenda. Enough of these secrets. I can see how Brenda always waits for his shifts. Now, when she got rid of that scoundrel Colin, who knows, we might even become relatives. I have no objections." 2 weeks later, Mr. Stroman stood by the window on the second floor of his house, watching as Walter and his wife walked down the path. The conversation between father and son had not been easy. Walter flatly refused to accept any gifts, rewards, or presents from him. "Don't you understand? I did this not for you, but for my sister. Brenda and I became friends in the clinic and agreed to stay in touch. I'm almost 33, and the plots of tear-jerking melodramas where a father and son find each other after decades and become the closest people, that's not us. It's too late. I helped you not for some riches. I'm used to achieving everything in life on my own, and these principles of mine are unshakable." Mr. Stroman did not try to persuade him. He only shook his head firmly, sincerely thanking him for saving Brenda, and made it clear that their dialogue was over. The next day, sitting in his office at work, he summoned his secretary. "Schedule a meeting with the notary for tomorrow at 3 p.m. I want to change my will." Having given this order, he rubbed his hands contentedly and said to himself, "There will be someone to entrust my business to. Walter has grown into a good person. I am proud. We all make mistakes in life, and I will do everything in my power to correct it." Emily worked methodically in the restaurant's kitchen. She unloaded the huge dishwashers, wiped clean dishes with a towel, and loaded dirty ones again when the waiters brought them from the dining room. Their restaurant was the oldest and most famous in town. Getting a job here had been incredibly fortunate. Emily loaded another batch into the dishwasher and glanced at her watch. Her shift was ending soon, and she had to pick up her son. She had separated from his father a year ago, a man she'd married out of spite for her first love. She had discovered Walter was seeing someone else and dumped him right before prom, and married Ken hastily shortly after graduating from school. Her husband was controlling, forbidding her to work or pursue higher education, and then, 6 years ago, Emily became pregnant with her long-awaited son, and now she was working the restaurant, with hours that allowed her to pick up her child from daycare on time. Everyone was quite happy, but their family life gradually crumbled. Ken was rarely at home, spending all his spare time with his buddies. And a year ago, he suddenly announced, "I've fallen in love with someone else. We've been together for 2 years and we're expecting a baby. Let's divorce quickly. You and Tommy can't stay here. My new wife will move into this apartment. Find a place to live, and I'll help with money. Let's split up peacefully, without fighting over property or alimony." "Fine," Emily replied simply. "I'm glad you at least had the decency to tell me yourself." "Well, what's there to hide? But it's good you're not being dramatic. Others would throw a tantrum." "Don't worry, Emily. her mother-in-law interjected. "I'll see Tommy and help out." Emily just nodded resignedly. She found a tiny but cheap apartment for rent next to the restaurant. Her landlady, Mrs. Allen, lived in the adjacent place with her alcoholic son, Scott. At first, he even made unwanted advances. "So, you're my mother's new tenant," Scott accosted her at the entrance. His greasy hair hung in his face, his blue eyes glinting. "I'm Scott. And your name, babe?" "Emily," the woman replied. "But excuse me, I'm rushing." "What's the rush? If you're in such a hurry, you can be kicked out right away. Won't take long. Let's get acquainted properly. Sit and talk." "I need to pick up my son from kindergarten," Emily protested. "Watch who you're talking to. You're talking to the apartment's landlord," Scott snarled, grabbing Emily's arms roughly, and began forcing her into the apartment. She was saved by keys, which she had in her hands. With her makeshift weapon, she struck Scott's leg, using all her might. Once, twice, 3 times. His grip loosened. Mrs. Allen burst out of her door, wielding a broom, which she brought down on Scott's back. "You fool! Why are you harassing my tenants? You bloodsucker! Always stealing my pension, and now you want to drive away my tenants? No wonder no one stays here. It must be your doing." "She attacked me first, look!" yelled her son, showing his torn pant leg. "Serves you right. You'll heal like a dog anyway," Mrs. Allen retorted, then turned to Emily. "Don't be angry with him. He's a fool, crude and insolent, but cowardly. Just don't move out, and I'll keep him in line." "All right," nodded Emily, who had nowhere else to go anyway. "But let him know he won't get off so easily next time." Scott learned his lesson after a few more rebuffs and quieted down, barely causing trouble anymore. Soon, Ken and Emily divorced. Ken even helped Emily with the move. However, that was it. As expected, Emily never received the promised help. Ken didn't even call, showing little interest in his son. However, Emily's personal issues paled in comparison to her work situation. Emily's relationship with the administrator was strained. Deborah was an angry and jealous woman, though beautiful. When she hired Emily, she emphasized, "I value loyalty in people, do you understand? You must be loyal to me. If you notice anything important, report it to me." "Are you trying to make me a spy?" Emily protested. "Besides, others won't confide in a mere dishwasher." "Don't worry. People relax when they view you as furniture," Deborah smirked. "Just keep your eyes and ears open. That way, you might last longer than others." Emily learned her lesson and avoided arguing with her boss, but she never snitched on her co-workers. All this year, Emily had firmly endured Deborah's constant nagging and complaints. She could burst into Emily's workspace unexpectedly to check plate cleanliness and sanitary compliance, often making up new requirements on the spot. Yet Emily didn't complain. Her earnings were decent enough to support herself and her son, with tips shared among staff after each shift. This day, after her shifts, Emily would hurry to the kindergarten. Tommy would be dressed and waiting, walking near the porch with the security guard. "Tommy, let's go home," she said cheerfully. "We'll stop by the bakery on the way. We still have time." "Oh, great! I've been craving cheesecake all day, Mum. You can't imagine." Tommy chatted excitedly. "By the way, I need a suit, tie, bow tie, and white shirt for our New Year's performance. I forgot to tell you. Mrs. Fowley says we need to start dance rehearsals, and I need the costume by Monday." "Thanks for the notice," Emily smiled, kissing her son's rosy cheek. "We'll get you a suit, Tommy. You'll be my most handsome gentleman at the ball." "Mum, you're too exaggerating," her son laughed. "But we are getting lessons from a special instructor. Mrs. Fowley says he's a champion dancer." Emily checked her smartphone to find hundreds of messages in the parents' chat. She had the next day off while Tommy was invited to a friend's birthday party. The woman planned to use her time to buy a costume for her son, but the prices for new items were too high. With a week until payday, Emily felt discouraged. Then she remembered the nearby flea market, where bargains could sometimes be found. She went there and immediately spotted an elderly woman selling an almost new suit. Nothing fancy, but classic. "How much is it?" Emily asked. "I need it for my son's performance." "I'll give you a good price. It's practically new. My grandson only wore it twice before it went into storage," the woman replied. "Take it, dear. You won't regret it." Without hesitation, Emily bought the suit and went to the mall for a shirt and tie. The children had already finished playing on the trampolines and eaten their cake. That evening at home, she decided to check if the suit needed dry cleaning. She reached into the pocket and suddenly pulled out something thick, folded in half. It was a colour photograph of a beautiful young girl laughingly embracing a young man. It hit her like an electric shock. She had seen this picture before, but with a different person. Back in first grade, Emily had sat next to Walter, a serious and handsome boy. He was raised by his grandmother after his parents, both geologists, went missing on an expedition. Emily and Walter, too, lived in neighbouring yards, so they always walked home from school together. Walter carried her briefcase and protected her from bullies. Emily's mother, still alive and healthy then, adored Walter and approved of her daughter's friendship with him. By the last grade, everyone could see it. Walter and Emily were a couple for life. They made plans for their future together. Even the teachers smiled knowingly at their union. But right before graduation, nasty Hilary confronted Emily. Hilary was the queen of the school, a rich girl who came to school in a chauffeur-driven car. "Listen, you wretch, come here," Hilary snarled. "I'll show you something interesting." "What do you want from me? Talk to your girlfriends," Emily asked sullenly. "Look at this picture." Hilary thrust a photo at her. "Your precious Walter looks so happy with me." Emily studied the photo. Hilary wasn't lying. There she was, sitting on Walter's lap, hugging him. Emily threw the picture aside and rushed to the classroom. There, in front of everyone, she demanded to be sat away from Walter. She felt it beneath her dignity to let the traitor explain. Though Walter insisted nothing was happening between him and Hilary, even pleading Emily's mother to influence her daughter. It was futile. Then Emily's mother was diagnosed with cancer. Emily couldn't focus on trivial matters. Besides, Walter attended prom with Hilary, seemingly confirming the story. Soon after, Ken entered her life, appearing reliable at the time. Sadly, her mother didn't live a year after that. Their apartment turned out to be company-provided housing. Emily, now an adult, found herself homeless. That's when Ken proposed. But now Emily held another photo in her hands. Unmistakably, it was Hilary, in the same posing on someone's lap. Except the man wasn't Walter. Could it have been fake all along? Had she believed a deceiver who simply wanted to separate them? Even years later, the thought brought pain and regret for Emily. The woman barely slept that night. The next morning, she could hardly wait for the flea market to open. She took Tommy by the hand and hurried there, but the elderly merchant was gone. "Do you know the elderly woman in the grey scarf who was selling a suit here yesterday?" Emily asked one of the vendors, whose nose was red from the cold. "Mrs. Marsh, what do you want with her?" the woman asked suspiciously. "No complaints. She sold me something with a personal item in the pocket. The owner might want it back," Emily explained. "Don't bother looking. She won't be back for at least a week," sighed the vendor. "You see, Mrs. Marsh is a good woman, but she's had it rough. Poor health, and on top of that, her grandson's paralysed from the waist down. She's caring for him." "How might I find her?" Emily asked anxiously. "It's important." "My, aren't you persistent?" the woman remarked. "I don't know her address, but I can tell you how to get there." The next day she dropped her son at kindergarten early. She had a couple of hours before work. The restaurant opened at noon, so the directions led to Walter's house, her school sweetheart. Realizing she wasn't mistaken, Emily felt excited. She had to ring the intercom for a long time. Finally, a panting male voice said, "Grandma, have you lost your keys?" "Walter, it's me," Emily said after some hesitation. "Let me in, please." The door opened. Emily rushed up to the second floor. There, in the doorway, in a wheelchair, Walter was waiting for her. "Hello," he said casually, as if nothing had happened. "Come in." "I found a picture," Emily said. "Accidentally bought a children's suit from your grandmother." "And realised that I wasn't guilty?" Walter grinned crookedly. "I told you then that it was a montage." Emily sighed. "I'm sorry to barge in like this." "Never mind. Almost no one comes to our house now. Grandma went to queue for milk this morning and I barely managed to wheel myself over to the intercom," Walter said. "Good thing you waited and didn't leave." "And what about you?" Emily asked cautiously. "I'm so sorry for you." "Yes," Walter nodded and smiled. "You probably don't know, but after that incident I was furious. I married Hilary impulsively. Her father helped me with my further studies. Then we opened a restaurant and started working. I became a chef, a pretty good one if I may say so. I even won competitions." "Oh, you always loved cooking," Emily smiled. "I've never eaten anything tastier than your scrambled eggs." "Don't exaggerate," Walter replied seriously and continued his story. "We didn't have children, and we quietly ran our business. Her powerful father retired and moved abroad. That's when Hilary started drinking and driving drunk. I didn't notice at first, and then it was too late. One evening, she picked me up from the restaurant after work and crashed into a concrete pillar. She walked away without a scratch, but I got a fractured spine and ended up disabled." "How awful!" Emily gasped. "Can nothing be done?" "The operation costs money, but there are no guarantees. My grandmother and I are saving up, but it's slow going." "Won't your wife help with the money?" Emily asked. "After all, it's her fault." "I never accused Hilary of anything," Walter answered with a sigh. "Then, a half a year later, she came and said a crippled man didn't interest her anymore. She filed for divorce, and I agreed it would be better." "And left you broken in the care of your elderly grandmother," sighed Emily. "Yes, we turned out to be quite different from Romeo and Juliet," Walter grinned. "Tell me about yourself. What do you do? How do you live?" They chatted for a while until Emily realised she had to hurry to work. Deborah would be furious if she were late. The young woman promised her former sweetheart she would return. Walter watched her leave with a smile. Downstairs at the entrance, Mrs. Marsh met Emily. She immediately recognised her customer and grinned. "Had you guessed and remembered the address?" "No, someone at the market helped, and then I figured it out myself," said Emily. "Mrs. Marsh, isn't there anything that can be done?" "What can we do?" sighed the woman. "Surgery is necessary. I only have this apartment of value, so we can't sell it and live on the street." "Yes, that's true. Do you mind if I visit?" "Of course not. Why should my grandson sit alone with an old woman? Bring your son, too. You brought him that suit," Granny added. "I won't leave Walter any more," Emily promised firmly, surprising herself with her conviction. But the words were said. She hurried to work, feeling elated. From that day on, after taking her son to kindergarten, Emily spent a couple of hours at Walter's. They even gave her a set of keys to the house. Her school sweetheart came back to life before her eyes. Walter started getting out of bed in the morning with pleasure. He began cooking simple dishes again, though he hadn't been near the stove for a long time. Mrs. Marsh quietly rejoiced at the changes in her grandson's behaviour. On weekends, Emily brought Tommy to visit. He quickly made himself at home, baking cupcakes with grandmother and playing chess with Walter. Watching them from the sidelines, Emily thought this could have been her family, if not for that foolish mistake of youth. Time flew by quickly. Tommy learned his dance for the kindergarten performance when Emily's ex-husband suddenly reappeared in her life. He came with questions for Emily's landlady, then began making demands, acting as if he still had the right to do so. "Tell me, where do you take our child on weekends? He doesn't have a normal home, and now his mother's got her hands full, going around with her lovers. You've got someone else, haven't you?" "Why do you even care?" Emily asked, looking squeamishly at her ex-husband. "Need I remind you who shared the bed with another woman for 2 years of our marriage?" "It's all your fault. You never loved me. Carla, on the other hand, values relationships." Ken immediately jumped up to defend his new partner. "And anyway, this isn't about me." "Yes, it is about you, Ken," Emily snapped. "For 6 months, you haven't given a penny for your son, haven't visited him once. And now what? You've come to assert your rights?" "What's the big deal? The boy isn't starving. He has a mother. You haven't filed for child support." "Well, I will. You and your mother convinced me you'd help on your own. By the way, you said before the divorce that your wife was pregnant. Where's the baby? It's been a year already. Or is your Carla an elephant? They carry longer." "We're not discussing that," her ex-husband barked. "Dump your lover, whoever he is, otherwise I'll file for termination of parental rights and take my son." "Of course, jealousy took over. You still don't care about Tommy, do you? Ken, I'm not going to listen to your nonsense anymore. Now leave. You can see your son when he's home." Ken struggled to leave her rented flat. Emily felt defenceless against her ex-husband now. If only she could cure Walter, or at least help him walk again. These were just dreams, but she desperately searched for money. Emily decided to be more proactive. She went to the restaurant director. Mr. Koskov wasn't a bad man, but he wasn't usually giving away money freely. He refused to give his employee a large sum. Emily left his office in tears. Then Deborah blocked her path. "Let's talk," she said. "I think you'll be interested. I don't know what you need money for, but you can get some. Of course, you'll have to do something in return." "What exactly?" Emily asked. "I desperately need the money." "Well, look," said Deborah when they reached the dishwasher's workplace. "I work for these people. You know this restaurant, also very famous. They want to close our establishment. During this crisis, only one place will survive. I can't risk my reputation, so I need someone else to spoil the dishes. You need money, and my real employer will pay. When this restaurant closes, you'll come to work with me, to our competitors." "No, I'm not going to earn money that way," Emily replied. "Besides, if anything goes wrong, you'll blame me, won't you?" "Of course. What did you expect?" Deborah laughed. "That's how it works. By the way, you can't refuse any more, my dear. You know everything now, which means you're in the same boat with me. Don't like it? Leave and do what you want. But no decent establishment in town will hire you again." "So I have no choice?" Emily asked. "Quite clever, really." "Yes, I'm good at planning," the supervisor smirked. "Here's your first task. Put this powder in a couple of guests' dishes. It's just a laxative, nothing serious will happen. The establishment will get negative reviews. Now, hurry up. Yesterday's dishes are waiting." Meanwhile, Emily kept in touch with Walter. He and his grandmother increasingly urged her to move in with them, with Tommy, to save on rent. Plus, Mrs. Marsh could pick up the child early from kindergarten. She seemed rejuvenated since the boy came into her life. But Emily hesitated, afraid of making another mistake. Then Deborah gave her a new task. The mayor was holding a reception at the restaurant. His main requirement was no seafood at the dinner. One of the important guests had a severe seafood allergy. That's what Deborah was counting on. Such a scandal would certainly not be hushed up. She discovered what the tall guest was allergic to, took out a concentrated solution, and asked Emily to pour it into his drink. "The noise will be great," the boss said, rubbing her hands together. "Can you imagine poisoning a man of that calibre?" "Yes," Emily replied and took the vial. Her boss held it with thin, gloved hands. "Look, don't confuse anything. I checked. He'll drink still mineral water and black coffee at the end of dinner." But the dishwasher had already made up her mind. She wasn't going to poison any guests. She knew the restaurant was Mr. Koskoff's life's work. He had started as a simple cook, made his fortune, but still loved to cook, especially when important people visited. Such a scandal would destroy him. Emily kept the vial. She planned to claim, "Your potion didn't work." When Deborah demanded a glass of sparkling wine to lift her spirits before the evening, Emily poured the vial's contents into her drink. After a few sips, the supervisor turned red and began swelling rapidly. Until then, she had kept her allergies secret. Of course, the woman survived, but she was really frightened from possible consequence. That evening, the reception went splendidly. The staff anticipated generous tips. Emily knew she would never work there again. She quietly finished washing the last plates, removed them from the machine, wiped them, and placed them to their place. The weekend passed, and Monday morning brought a call from Deborah, summoning Emily to collect her final payment. "Thought you could outsmart me," roared her boss. "Well, I'm alive, and now you're unemployed and will be scraping by. You loser." "Better unemployed than a poisoner," Emily replied. "Besides, you hate me. You'd have fired me anyway. What difference does it make, now or later?" "Ah, smarter than you look," Deborah sneered. "Now get out while you still can, and stay out of my way." From the restaurant, Emily went home. Today, she needed to pay the rent. The money she received would be enough for a month. But then what? When Emily told all her story to Walter and his grandmother, they immediately sprang into action, and finding helpful neighbours, moved Emily and Tommy's belongings to their apartment. The former landlady, however, promptly informed Ken of Emily's new address, which had been left just in case. The ex-husband promised generous payment for this information, unable to rest, knowing Emily's situation was improving. The next morning, Tommy went to kindergarten, and Emily was going to return a few hours later for her son's kindergarten matinee. She even felt relieved about losing her job. Requesting time off from Deborah would have been impossible. Walking back to Walter's house, she entered the apartment building and felt someone catch the closing door behind her. Emily hurried up to the second floor, opened the door and slipped inside, but her ex-husband followed her into the apartment. "Ken, what are you doing? You scared me," she cried, backing away. "I need to know where my wife is sneaking off to," he said indignantly. "Ex-wife," Emily corrected. "You have a new family." "That doesn't matter. So, who you live with?" Ken strode into the room, spotted Walter in his wheelchair, and laughed. "No surprise here. The lovebirds reunited, as I see. Congratulations on your wonderful life with a cripple." "That's none of your business," Emily snapped. "He's twice the man you are, and actually cares about my son." "Is he even my child?" Ken snarled. "Maybe you two never stopped seeing each other. I've been walking around like a fool all these years. Anyway, just wait for the court summons. My child won't live with such an immoral mother. He's better off in boarding school." After Ken left, Emily broke down in tears. She knew he was doing this deliberately to hurt her, but she felt powerless to stop him. Walter tried to comfort her. He reminded her that mothers should look beautiful at the matinee, not be crying. Emily finally calmed down. She put on her favourite dress, which she had once sewn for the prom. She let her hair down, styled it beautifully, did her makeup, and went to the party. Mrs. Marsh was also invited, but cited business and stayed home. Tommy's performance was sensational. He moved noticeably better than the other children. His dance with a girl from the kindergarten earned thunderous applause. The coach, who choreographed the number, was beaming. He approached the children, handed them their prizes, then walked toward Emily. "Are you Tommy's mum?" he asked. "The boy has obvious talent. You've seen it yourself. It can't be taught. It's a natural gift." "Yes, I'm seeing this side of my son for the first time," Emily smiled. "Bring him to my studio. He could become a professional ballroom dancer. He'll win championships, I promise," the coach said, handing her his business card. "Such talent shouldn't be wasted." "We'll do our best," Emily said, lowering her eyes. "I'm temporarily out of work, so paying for lessons will be difficult." "I'm willing to teach Tommy for free," promised the coach, who introduced himself as Ruslan. "And don't worry about expenses like costumes. Someone here has an offer for you." An elegantly dressed, beautiful young woman approached Emily. She was the mother of Tommy's dance partner. "Please don't say no," she began. "I'm Lynn, Melissa's mum. Finding boys for ballroom dancing is a real challenge. Finding a good partner can be harder than buying a car or house. We've been at this for 3 years, so we know what we talk. Your Tommy is exceptional. We're prepared to cover all costume and travel expenses. It's common practice, and our family can easily afford it. Just let Tommy dance with Melissa." "Wow! OK, agreed," Emily smiled. The children truly looked magical together. "And that's with almost no training," Lynn exclaimed. "For the championship, they'll prepare several dances and definitely win a prize." They exchanged contact information, and Lynn even offered to drive Tommy and his mother to and from classes, if needed. After saying goodbye, an elated Tommy walked home. The boy was inspired to dance after his first triumph. Meanwhile, Emily navigated the challenges and joys of motherhood. Deborah continued undermining the restaurant's reputation, attempting to force the establishment's closure. However, she couldn't complete her mission. The owner, unhappy with her staff dismissal policy, decided to contact his former employee directly. "Emily, hello, this is Mr. Koskoff," he said over the phone. "Please tell me, why did you leave?" "I simply disagreed with Deborah," Emily replied, surprised. "Does she claim otherwise?" "No, I just can't understand letting a good employee go. If you're interested in returning, I'll hire you back," Mr. Koskoff responded. The next day, over breakfast, Emily shared with Walter how Deborah was working against her boss. Then came the revelation. Walter burst out. "Are you really unaware? Or are you pretending? The competitor's restaurant is run by Hillary, my ex-wife. I created that restaurant, planned everything, then got pushed out because her father provided the funding." "Oh," Emily said, startled. "What a shame. I really had no idea. So, how should we handle this? Could your ex's attempts to destroy her main competitor work in our favour?" "Actually, yes," Walter replied, thoughtfully. "Do you really want your job back?" "Of course," Emily said. "I love our restaurant, and the owner is wonderful. Besides, where else can I go in my situation? No education, no housing, with a small child." "Hold on, you mentioned the administrator Deborah. A tall, attractive brunette around 40, always wearing jewellery?" Walter described. "Yes, that's her," she confirmed. "You look like you've seen her before." "At her own wedding," Walter smirked. "She's Hillary's aunt, her mother's younger sister. They're close friends, since the age gap isn't large. Your former employer truly nurtured a snake in his bosom." "Wow, I wonder if he knows," Emily mused. "Not necessarily. People rarely take interest in others' affairs," Walter replied. "I just remembered this by chance. By the way, I have some information about both of them. Not exactly compromising material, but enough to prove their connection. There's just one problem." "What is it?" Emily asked. "All the photos and videos from my past life are at my dacha. It's a couple of hours from the city by train. By the way, I developed photos too. I was into film." "I'll try to track down the evidence," Emily offered without hesitation. "Just be careful, okay?" Walter asked. "Those places have long been favoured by the homeless. I wouldn't be surprised if they've taken over the dacha. No one's been there for years. I protected you from stray dogs in our childhood, but here I'm powerless. I can't get there in my wheelchair. There's only a forest path from the train station to the woods." The next morning, after taking her son to kindergarten, she put on an old tracksuit, ski jacket, warm hat and gloves, and set off. 3 hours later, she reached the old house through the forest path. Though abandoned and unkempt, there were signs of life. Smoke billowed from the stovepipe. Emily used her key to open the door. An unkempt, middle-aged woman in a stretched jumper blocked her way. "What are you doing here with keys? Is this your house? There's nothing for you here. We're wintering, and we're not leaving," the homeless woman declared stubbornly. "I'm not asking you to leave," Emily replied with a smile. "I know you're wintering here. You see, the owner is paralysed, and I just need to collect some things. 5 minutes, then I'll go." "The poor man is paralysed. What a pity," sighed the woman. "Come in, I'm Wilma. This is Kelly and Ben." "How did you get in?" "Found the key in the spare room," Wilma smiled. "I'm actually from a neighbouring town. After my stepchildren had driven me from their father's cottage after his death, I was left homeless, and these unfortunate souls joined me. We took this little house. Nobody ever comes here. We even made jam in the summer. Would you like some currant leaf tea?" "Let's have some," Emily smiled. "You know, I doubt Walter and his grandmother would have evicted you. Consider yourselves approved tenants." "That's wonderful," Wilma rejoiced. "We're maintaining the plot and use everything very neatly." "So where's the storage room with photographic supplies?" "I'll show you, sweetie," Wilma beamed. "What a relief to have the owner's permission. Deep down I was afraid of getting into jail for trespassing." She led Emily to the storeroom. En route, Emily observed the house, spotlessly clean, without empty bottles or signs of disorder. These people lived more like resort guests than squatters. Setting aside her thoughts, Emily began searching. She soon found a photo stack and carefully packed it in her rucksack. After exchanging phone numbers with Wilma, even the homeless had phones, she said goodbye and headed to the station. The return journey felt shorter and more cheerful. At home, Walter supported her decision about letting the homeless stay, especially after hearing the impression they made on Emily. "Call your former boss and arrange a meeting," Walter said after listening to the tapes. "Now you can back up your words with facts." "Is it really going to be possible to defend myself?" "You're saving me again," Emily smiled, "only this time from angry women and unemployment." "Well, knights always save their loved ones," replied Walter. "Nothing surprising here." "Do you still love me?" asked Emily, coming closer. "Never stopped," replied Walter. "To demand reciprocity in my position is foolish, I realise, but that's just the way it is." "Oh, stop it. I'm ready to marry you even now." "Should we go to the registry office?" said Emily. "Are you proposing to me now?" laughed Walter. "It appears so." Emily smiled happily. "Do you agree or not?" "Granny, there's my wedding coming up," shouted Walter at the top of his voice. "You'll have to put aside your dying plans. that scare me every day." "Where can I go now?" Mrs. Marsh entered the room smiling happily. "And anyway, I'm only 70. I expect at least 2 more grandchildren." An hour later, Emily went to the restaurant for a difficult conversation with her former boss. Fortunately, he was available and agreed to see her. Though initially nervous in his office, she eventually gathered her courage. "Did you know that Deborah is related to the owner of your main competitor?" asked Emily. "Impossible!" exclaimed the former chief indignantly. "I would never meet, much less hire someone from a rival business. It would be foolish." "Then perhaps this is worth examining." Emily placed the photos on the supervisor's desk. "Great," Mr. Koskov sighed. "I've been wondering who the traitor was, and she was right under my nose all this time. Oh, that's their ex-chef in the picture. Very talented guy. I wonder where he is now. Anyway, I need time to review all this information. What do you want in return?" "Only justice," said Emily tiredly, and left the office, finally allowing herself to tremble from the stress and adrenaline. She had to get Tommy from daycare. That evening Mr. Koskov called, requesting a meeting. Emily invited him to Walter's home. The former boss understood everything instantly upon seeing a man in a wheelchair in the kitchen. "Was it for his operation that you asked the money?" Mr. Koskov asked Emily. "I'll provide it. Interest-free loan, if you prefer." "Yes, that would suit us perfectly," replied Emily cheerfully. "What have you decided about the other matter?" "We'll fight the competition, but honestly, come back as administrator. The restaurant needs you. Would that work for you?" "Absolutely!" Emily could barely contain her joy. "Have you found a dishwasher yet?" "No luck, but you know how hard it is to find workers these days," replied Mr. Koskov. "If you have someone in mind, hire them." "I think I can help," Emily smiled. "Of course, I'll advance it to you now, and don't delay the surgery. I understand too much time has been lost already." After Mr. Koskov left, Emily and Walter submitted their marriage application remotely the next morning. They wanted to be married before the operation. The new administrator then went to manage the restaurant. The staff welcomed the change enthusiastically. While updating the menu, Emily made a phone call. "Wilma, I have a business proposition. Would you like to try working as a dishwasher at the restaurant under my supervision? I can help with housing too. Come to town and I'll explain everything." That evening, after leaving her son with Mrs. Walsh and Walter, she met Wilma at the station. The homeless woman stood clutching a large bag, looking lost. Emily took her to her former landlady, paid 2 months' rent in advance. Mr. Koskov was pleased with a new dishwasher, and Emily got a bonus for finding a new employee. This development didn't escape Ken's notice. The ex-husband appeared at the restaurant one morning to speak with Emily. "Look, we both made a tragic mistake by splitting up, but it's time to fix it," Ken declared. "I'll divorce Carla, and we'll reunite. I'll even overlook your sins and betrayal." "Ken, what are you talking about?" Emily cut off his dramatic speech. "You were the one who cheated and left, not me." "I've come to my senses, and am ready to spend my life with you. That is, to start a family again," replied Ken, eyeing his ex-wife in her new stylish business suit. Emily looked radiant. "Sorry, I'm not interested," she replied. "Well, then be prepared. One day I'll take Tommy from daycare and you'll never see him again," Ken threatened. "With a mother like you, he doesn't belong here. You live with your lover. You have no home. Meanwhile, my mother and I have 2 apartments. "Ken, your threats don't work anymore. I'm getting married tomorrow and will have my husband's place. Keep embarrassing yourself with empty threats if you like. Or let's go to court. We'll see who's right. The father who hasn't seen his son in a year or paid child support, or the mother who cares for him daily." "Oh, your new position has made you bold," the ex-husband snarled. "Enough of this nonsense. Go on, I have work to do." "You could at least offer me a free coffee," the ex-husband grumbled. "We're not complete strangers." The next day, Emily and Walter became a wife and a husband. Tommy attended and presented his mother with flowers, which Mrs. Marsh had helped him select and purchase. The elderly woman had grown deeply attached to the boy and now considered him her own grandson. 2 weeks later, Walter underwent surgery. It was successful, and the doctors gave optimistic prognoses. A month later, he took his first steps with a walker's support, though he still needed rehabilitation, which Mr. Koskoff helped finance. He explained it this way. "Look, kid, consider my offer. I know you're an exceptional cook and I want one for my restaurant. Focus on recovery, get better, then come work for me. You know, I might still be on disability. I can probably work, but I'll need a cane," Walter replied. "No problem. We'll modify the kitchen to accommodate you. We'll make the chef with a cane our signature feature." Mr. Koskoff grinned. "But honestly, I believe in you and medicine." The restaurant owner now regularly drove Emily home after closing, discussing important matters. She learned that 2 other people had been forced to report everything to Deborah out of fear. Now they were free from that obligation. With her information sources, Deborah lost favour with her niece, especially since Hilary had sought solace in wine. 6 months later, her restaurant closed. It was officially listed for sale after she was declared bankrupt. It emerged that she owed money across the city, trading on her father's reputation. Walter completed rehabilitation. His disability status was removed. The young man was returning to life and his beloved profession. He began by cooking at home, then invited Mr. Koskoff for a tasting. After sampling the dishes, Mr. Koskoff immediately insisted on adding them to the restaurant's menu. "This will be remarkable. You're invaluable. It's time to turn to your profession. You're a natural-born chef. You've just proven that to me conclusively." Walter smiled modestly, and soon he was back in his field. Meanwhile, Tommy was thriving in ballroom dancing. He and Melissa won competition after competition. The whole family now cheered him on at competitions. Mrs. Marsh learned all the dance terminology and even joined an adult group at the same dance school. Walter smiled watching his granny shop for dance shoes. He never imagined he could be this happy again, especially when Emily shared news of her pregnancy. Donna was so exhausted that she even began mentally counting her steps to her home. The night shift had been particularly grueling because the previous evening, just outside the city, a major traffic accident had occurred involving a truck, an intercity bus, and several cars. Throughout the night, a steady stream of injured people were brought to their hospital almost until dawn. Most of the injuries were minor, but several patients were in critical condition. Donna had long grown accustomed to the demands of her job and did not complain about her fate. For nearly 15 years she had been saving lives, yet she never grew numb to the suffering of others. She felt the pain of her patients as her own. Linda, the senior nurse of the department, had repeatedly tried to influence her protégée. "Donna, you can't do this. You'll burn out quickly if you take everything to heart." But Donna could not help it, although she tried to change her attitude towards work. Fortunately, the predictions about burnout, which Linda insisted upon, did not come true, and this fact reassured the woman, for what she feared most in the world was growing cold and hard-hearted. Only upon entering her apartment building did Donna realise she had lost count. She had tried many times to calculate the distance in steps from her home to the bus stop, but she had not yet succeeded. The woman involuntarily thought she should borrow Patrick's pedometer and measure the distance some day. Here her thoughts shifted from work to domestic concerns. She imagined how surprised her husband would be when she asked to borrow the step counter. Every morning Patrick set his alarm for 6 and went for a run, rain or shine. He tried to involve his wife and son in his healthy lifestyle, but Donna viewed his efforts with irony. "Patrick, the neighbours will think we're crazy if we all go out for a run together." Paul also viewed his father's enthusiasm with scepticism. "Dad, I'm not like you. I'm weak-willed and love to sleep." If his father started lecturing him, the boy would solemnly recite, "Father, forgive your son for his laziness and dreams." From the outside it looked comical, but Patrick was offended by such antics. Paul had been attending a school theatre club for the past 2 years and was proud of his cultural achievements. However, Patrick considered this pursuit unworthy of a real man. Donna opened the door to her apartment and immediately tripped over her son's sneaker. In annoyance, she muttered, "Again, he's scattered his shoes all over the hallway. No matter what I say, he does what he wants." She put away her son's shoes in the closet and took off her coat. "That's it, Donna. Now you'll have some tea and go to bed." After a night shift, especially such a restless one, she needed to restore her strength, and the best way to do that was with a good night's sleep. The woman went to the kitchen, but found it in disarray. She felt like crying from helplessness. What kind of people am I living with? Is it so difficult to clean up after yourself? Just you wait. I'll give you a piece of my mind tonight. Her mood was on the verge of breaking, and Donna began angrily throwing cups and plates into the sink. This was accompanied by clattering and her short remarks addressed to the 2 slobs who could only consume and make a mess, but were incapable of cleaning up after themselves. The kitchen floor also bore traces of the morning meal. She had to grab a broom and dustpan. When Donna swept the crumbs and candy wrappers into the trash, she noticed a crumpled notebook page at the bottom of the bin. At first she didn't think much of it, assuming probably Paul threw it away. He was doing his homework, made mistakes and tore out the page. Donna headed to the bedroom, but something made her return to the kitchen. Carefully, using 2 fingers, she retrieved the crumpled paper from the trash and unfolded it. She knew her son's handwriting, but this message was not written by Paul. Forgetting caution, Donna smoothed out the paper and began to read slowly. "I apologise for bothering you. I wouldn't have turned to you, and Mamma didn't let me do it before. If it weren't for the trouble she's in. Mamma doesn't tell me anything, but I overheard her talking to her friend that her illness is severe. I don't want my Mamma to die because she's all I have. Please help my Mamma, Patrick. This disease they found can be treated, but the treatment costs a lot of money and we don't have it. And so I thought you might be able to lend us at least a little. I will finish school soon, start working, and I will definitely pay you back every penny, I swear." Below, the message was also neatly written, "Amber Raskin." A relative, perhaps? But I know all of Patrick's relatives by heart, but there is no Amber among them. It's also strange, and where is the address? Donna emptied the bin onto the floor. A crumpled envelope, similar to the letter, ended up on top of the trash pile. The woman carefully placed both finds in a bag and thoughtfully said, "I don't like any of this. Why didn't Patrick say anything about this letter? Shall I just ask Patrick instead of racking my brain? Or shall I conduct a little investigation myself?" she thought. Making the right decision was interrupted by an insistent ring at the door. The woman quickly hid the plastic bag with the evidence and desperately said, "Oh, it must be my dear mother-in-law. Why on earth did she come here so early?" The doorbell rang again, and Donna, cursing her fate and her impudent mother-in-law, headed to the hallway. Helen didn't enter. She fluttered in and, forgetting that the first thing to do was to greet her daughter-in-law, she immediately proceeded to the main part of her speech. "How fortunate that I caught you at home. Aren't you working today?" Donna understood that her plans to sleep were entirely ruined, but the rules of propriety forced her to smile and be polite to her mother-in-law. "Come in, please. I just got back from the night shift. I'm dead tired, and I was going to get some sleep." "You can sleep later. I won't be long." The obvious hint that she had come in at an inconvenient time did not embarrass Donna's mother-in-law at all. She looked possessively around the hallway, then trotted uninvited into the kitchen, but stopped on the threshold. "Why is there such a mess here?" Donna looked at the pile of trash she had left and felt embarrassed. "I lost an earring. I thought I threw it out with the trash into the bin." Helen asked sarcastically. "Did you find it?" The daughter-in-law did not understand. "What?" The mother-in-law gave her another caustic look and said, "Your earring. It looks like both are still in your ears." Donna instinctively grabbed her ear. She realised that her mother-in-law did not believe the story about the earring and, in a lost voice, replied, "Yes, luckily I've already found it." The mother-in-law shook her head. "I see. You dress for work like it's a party." Caught in a lie, the daughter-in-law felt awkward. She bustled around the guest. "Please sit down, Helen. I'll put the kettle on. Would you like some tea?" The guest let out a meaningful sigh. "First, clean up the trash and wash your hands with soap. You're a medic. You should understand that poor sanitation contributes to the spread of infection. Personally, I try not to touch suspicious objects, and after the store, I always wash my hands first and then treat them with antiseptic. I advise you to do the same for prevention purposes." Like many women her age, Helen loved to talk about medicine and culture. Despite a complete lack of relevant education, she considered herself an expert in these two fields. She gathered information from the internet and then spread it among her friends and acquaintances. She had also tried to impose her views on the problems of modern medicine on her daughter-in-law, so Donna had to listen to the nonsense she could talk about for hours. Only once did Donna try to argue with Helen. This happened soon after their wedding with Patrick. Her mother-in-law was sharing her experience of treating varicose veins on her legs. She had diagnosed herself with this disease based on symptoms, but her methods of diagnosis and treatment horrified her daughter-in-law. "Helen, this is complete nonsense. Such radical methods can kill a person. Don't you dare try them on yourself." Her mother-in-law looked down on Donna and, not mincing words, scolded her. "If you had a medical degree, I would listen to you. But who is a nurse? Just a girl on errands. Whatever the doctor orders, she does. I am sure that in 10 years this useless position will be eliminated." Donna was very offended by her mother-in-law's attitude towards her profession. "You are deeply mistaken, Helen. The duties of the middle medical staff have their specifics and a wide range of responsibilities." Her mother-in-law shut her up again. "You defend your useless position so passionately because you are an underachiever. By the way, I am also surprised how the granddaughter of a professor could choose the profession of a nurse and be content with it. Wasn't it difficult to become a doctor? What prevented you? Or is there not enough brain power?" In approximately this spirit, Helen constantly spoke to her daughter-in-law. She could tell Donna to her face, for example, that she wanted to see a different, more educated woman next to her son. "Donna, if it weren't for your pedigree and the apartment you inherited from your grandfather, I wouldn't have allowed Patrick to marry you." Once, the daughter-in-law could not stand it and also asked an unpleasant question bluntly. "I wonder what makes your dear Patrick better than me?" How indignant her mother-in-law was then! Her face first turned pale, then flushed crimson, and her eyes flashed with anger. "You still have the audacity to compare yourself to my son. At least Patrick finished university and works in a managerial position, not carrying after the bedridden patients. And your job is to give enemas and clean up after others and count them pills." Donna did not want to tell her mother-in-law about the subtleties of her work, since Helen never listened to her daughter-in-law. Knowing his mother's character, Patrick generally tried not to provoke her, and in response to his wife's requests to protect her, he evasively replied, "Donna, please don't involve me in your quarrels. The only advice I can give you is not to anger my mother. You are younger than her. You can give in." For the sake of preserving the family, Donna silently endured her mother-in-law's antics. True, over the years, Helen had come to terms with her son's choice, but periodically, so to speak, in the mood, she bothered her daughter-in-law with her visits. Deep down, Donna felt sorry for her eccentric relative, for Helen was widowed early and devoted her entire life to her only son, and now she lived alone on the other side of the city, visiting them so often to avoid dying of boredom. While Donna set the table, her guest chattered self-absorbedly. "Donna, I didn't just come to see you. I want to ask for advice." With a coquettish glance, the mother-in-law paused dramatically before continuing with a blissful smile. "Donna, I've decided to add some variety to my life and came to seek your advice." Another pause followed, accentuated by a pleading look and an expressive sigh. Donna politely responded, "Of course, I'd be happy to help you with more than just advice." Her mother-in-law modestly lowered her eyes. "I don't even know where to begin. I wouldn't want you to think your mother-in-law has finally lost her mind." At that moment, Donna became slightly alarmed, but she said as gently as possible, "Helen, how could I think such a thing? You are a wise woman, deserving of admiration." The blatant flattery worked on the mother-in-law. Her eyes sparkled with mischief, and her brightly painted lips curved into a smile. "Oh, Donna, thank you for your kind words. I've been beside myself since yesterday." Along with her chair, Helen moved closer to her daughter-in-law, forgetting about the cooling tea in the beautiful cup. "You see, Donna, the neighbour from the second entrance recently joined a theatre studio. She says many elderly people attend this club, so I decided to try my luck too. Yesterday, I auditioned." Donna nervously giggled. "Auditioned?" Helen grew annoyed. "Why do you keep questioning me? And I don't understand your laughter. Maybe there's a great actress inside me, and I didn't discover my talent in time." Helen rose from her chair, gazing intently out the window, and began to declaim. "Why is this world so unfair? Why am I shivering in a booth while Lucy sleeps by the fireplace on a silk cushion? The master feeds her meat, and I get the bones." It came out very pompous and funny. Donna hiccuped a few times and then burst into laughter. The mother-in-law stared wildly, and the daughter-in-law couldn't calm down for several minutes. When the fit of laughter subsided, Donna managed to say, "Helen, I'm sorry. It was very expressive, truly, but I didn't understand why you were shivering in a booth." This question stumped the older woman. She blinked in confusion for half a minute and then pouted in offence. "You are so dense, Donna. I just read an excerpt from the monologue of the abandoned dog. This is the role I was given in the studio. The premiere of the performance will take place before the new year, but I don't understand why you're laughing." Donna took a deep breath to suppress another fit of laughter. "For heaven's sake, forgive me, Helen, but I can't imagine you in the role of a dog. You would be better suited for the role of a harsh mistress." Helen took this as a compliment. She sighed heavily again. I joined the studio too late. All the good roles have already been taken. I got the part of Daisy, and my friend will play Lucy. But I don't know how the audience will react to her character, since Cara weighs about 100 pounds. I think that's too much for a lapdog. The regret in Helen's voice was so sincere that Donna felt ashamed of her laughter. She even decided to encourage her mother-in-law by expressing her opinion on the role distribution. I think the role of Daisy is much more interesting. It's more dramatic and requires skill from the performer. A happy smile lit up the mother-in-law's face again. I thought so too, Donna. Just don't tell Patrick anything yet. I'll invite him to the premiere later. I want to surprise my son. Donna had a vivid imagination. She pictured Patrick's face when he saw his mother on stage as a stray dog named Daisy. The image was epic. After sharing the main news of the day, Helen moved on to the next part of her agenda. Donna, we've been chatting for quite a while. I've gotten hungry. I hope you have something to snack on. The daughter-in-law had to indulge her capricious mother-in-law for another hour. She was almost exhausted when the guest finally said the long-awaited words, "Oh, I've stayed too long. It's time for me to go home. I have rehearsals in the evening, and I haven't learned my monologue yet." After seeing Helen out, Donna collapsed onto the bed. The last conscious thought before she fell asleep was, "My mother-in-law is an actress capable of any role. After all, she is always pretending to be someone. So the theatre studio is just what she needs. Maybe she'll visit us less often." Unfortunately, Donna did not get a good night's sleep. After the conversation with her mother-in-law, she dreamed of giant dogs with human faces, and in the end she was awakened by her son returning from school. "Mum, did you have a tough shift?" he asked. "Why do you think that?" Donna peeked out from under the blanket. Paul snorted. "You were shouting something incomprehensible, and then started talking about dogs." Her son looked at her. "Are you and Dad planning to get a dog? I'm not against it." Donna shook her head vigorously. "No, God forbid. I can't keep up with cleaning after you two, and if we add an animal to the mix, it will be complete chaos." Her head was pounding, and she felt clumsy. She had to take a pill to ease her condition. It was only at night, when Patrick was snoring softly beside her, that Donna remembered the strange letter. She decided not to wake her husband to find out who the author of the message was and why this Amber was asking him for help. "I'll find out everything tomorrow," she thought reassuringly before falling asleep. Donna was awakened by a crash in the kitchen, followed by the sound of breaking glass. She jumped out of bed and rushed into the kitchen, intending to vent her anger on the culprits of the morning disaster. But seeing her son's frightened look, she decided not to give in to her emotions and calmly asked, "What's going on here?" "Mum, I swear I didn't do it on purpose. The cup just slipped out of my hands and fell," said her son, and rushed to broom the floor. "Mum, I didn't mean to. I accidentally knocked over the cup when I was getting mine. I'll clean it up right away." But Donna stopped him. "You'll be late for school. I'll clean it up. Has Dad been gone long?" Her son called out from the hallway. "He left really early today. He didn't even go for his run. I asked him why he was leaving so early, and he asked me not to stick my nose in adult business." A second later the door slammed, and Donna was left alone with her thoughts. Her husband's strange behaviour puzzled her. Patrick could only skip his traditional run for 2 reasons: illness or a natural disaster. Since calm reigned outside and the autumn sun was generously shining, Donna thought her husband might be having health issues, but she quickly dismissed the idea. Patrick valued his health greatly and would raise an alarm at the slightest cough. Clearly, some other reason had compelled him to drastically change his routine. Could it be related to that letter? Donna retrieved the message from the unknown Amber from the drawer and read it again. Then she looked at the clock. If I hurry, I can make it there and back in a day. Donna reached the village without any incidents, the journey taking just over an hour. It impressed her not only with its size but also with its cleanliness. The sidewalks in the centre were paved with tiles, and almost every house boasted flower beds. This colourful palette made the autumn seem less gloomy. Donna said inspiredly, "This place is quite nice." A woman, around 40, passing by, casually remarked, "Of course, it's beautiful here, better than in some cities." Donna rushed after the stranger. "Please wait a moment. You probably know everyone here. Could you tell me where the Raskins live? I'm looking for Amber." The woman thought for a moment. Amber, the librarian's daughter. Donna intuitively nodded, and the stranger briefly explained. "That's on Central Street. Go to the very end and turn left into the alley. The librarian's house is the third from the corner. Got it?" Donna nodded in agreement and headed in the indicated direction. But the villager didn't stop there and began to share all the news about Amber's family. Patricia, her mother, is such an unhappy woman. She studied in town, but didn't finish because she married a townie. But then they separated. She has worked honestly here for many years, and now grief has come to her house, poor woman. She is still so young, but she is already fading away before her eyes. The librarian's house stood out starkly from the neighbouring homes. The paint on the wooden structure had long since peeled off, and the surrounding area was equally neglected, clearly in need of a caring hand. Donna thought, poor woman, she must be still living without a husband. She stopped at the lopsided gate and called out, "Can I come in?" There was no response, so Donna cautiously entered the yard. To avoid being suspected of ill intent, she called out again, "Is anybody home?" The door creaked open, and a thin woman in a faded housecoat appeared on the porch, looking at the visitor with a pleading gaze. "Who are you?" Donna blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "I'm from the school, the new teacher of your Amber. I'd like to see your daughter." Honoma gave her a distrustful look. "Amber hasn't returned from her classes yet. It would have been easier for you to find her at school than to walk across the whole village. What is this about? As far as I know, no one has complained about Amber. Or has she done something wrong?" It was clear that the woman was worried. Donna tried to reassure her. "Your Amber is a wonderful girl, and I came to see you for an entirely different reason. Amber told me about your trouble, so I came." Patricia sighed. "Come inside. There's no need to talk on the doorstep, and there are ears everywhere. I don't like it when people gossip about me." Donna followed the homeowner inside. Despite the modest furnishings, the house was impeccably clean. Patricia gestured to a chair. "Please, have a seat. I'm listening." Donna sat down and repeated firmly, "Patricia, I want to help you." The homeowner smirked. "I'm curious. How can you help me?" Donna felt a sudden jolt, as if struck by an electric shock. This woman, likely her peer, exuded an aura of death. Over her many years working in the hospital, Donna had encountered this phenomenon numerous times. She could unerringly sense when a patient was nearing the end. Patricia's breath of death was still faint but unmistakable. Donna spoke softly yet confidently. "Patricia, I will try to help you. I have many acquaintances in medical circles. In the coming days, I will arrange for you to be consulted by the best specialists." A smile of despair appeared on the homeowner's face again. "Thank you for your kindness, but I doubt anyone can help me now. A few months ago there was a chance, but there was no money for treatment, and I still don't have it. Donna continued to question the unfortunate woman. And what about relatives? Is there no one who can help you? Patricia sat down on the chair next to her guest, her gaze becoming thoughtful. Why not? She said. I do have relatives, an uncle, but he doesn't want to know me. Holding her breath, Donna asked the next question. And your husband? Patricia looked at her strangely. Husband? She echoed. Well, I had a husband once, but that was a very long time ago, so long ago that I don't remember his face or voice, but perhaps it's for the best, not to remember someone who once betrayed you. Donna sat in silence. She felt that this unfortunate woman needed to talk. Patricia remained silent for a few minutes, her distant gaze indicating that her thoughts were far away. Finally, very softly, the hostess said, I see you are ready to hear my confession. Very well, I will tell you everything and try not to bore you with unnecessary details. I am an orphan. My parents died in a fire when I was very young. The farm caught fire and they rushed to save the cows. They were both very brave. People shouted for them to save themselves, but they started leading the cows out. They managed to save almost all the animals when one of the workers shouted, Henry, the calves are still inside. My father rushed to save the calves, and at that moment the roof collapsed. My mother screamed and ran after him. She wanted to pull him out, but there was another collapse of the burning roof. Patricia paused, her eyes filled with distant memories. Donna waited patiently for her to continue. I don't remember any of this. I'm relying on the stories of my Uncle Vince, my father's brother. He took me in, although his wife was against it. Uncle Vince had 3 sons of his own, and I was an unwanted addition. In short, I was mistreated, not only by my aunt but also by my cousins. So I dreamed of escaping the house where I hated everyone, and I managed to do so right after school. I enrolled in a pedagogical college and soon met Patrick. At the mention of her husband's name, Donna shuddered. Patricia noticed her reaction. Are you cold? She asked sympathetically. Our house is chilly, and we have to save firewood. Donna reassured her. No, I'm not cold. Please continue. Patricia nodded and continued her story in the same measured tone. So, with Patrick everything was fine, until his mother found out about our relationship. She ambushed me once near my college, insulted me, and threatened to make me expelled. Of course, I tearfully told Patrick, and he suggested we get married secretly from his mother. Back then, it seemed romantic to both of us. We managed to keep our relationship a secret for 6 months. We rented a tiny apartment, and there we enjoyed our hard-won happiness. But Patrick soon grew tired of such romance. He started visiting less and less, and I was already in my 9th month of pregnancy. The landlady demanded payment for 3 months, and I had no money. So I gathered my courage and went to my mother-in-law's apartment. When Patrick saw me, he trembled like an aspen leaf and couldn't speak. His mother started pushing me out the door, shouting, "Get out!" She said Patrick had found a decent girl, the granddaughter of a professor, and their wedding was coming up. She said that she wouldn't let me ruin her son's life. So I told her that polygamy is illegal and showed her papers about our marriage. She was shocked. Patrick was outraged by my actions. He started shouting that he had filed for divorce. I didn't wait for them to attack me with their fists and quietly left. I hoped my uncle would help, but he didn't even let me in, telling me to go to the village, to my parents' house. So I went. Donna was very anxious. And then what happened? How did you survive alone with a child? Why didn't you sue your ex-husband for child support?" Patricia stood up, her voice different now. "As you can see, I didn't die," she said, "and I didn't demand child support because I didn't want that scoundrel involved in my daughter's life. I survived without his filthy money and raised my daughter. Amber will be 15 soon, and if it weren't for my sudden illness—" Donna grabbed Patricia's hands. "I will definitely help you, and you shouldn't lose hope." The heavy door slammed, and a girl in a school uniform entered the room. Patricia bustled again. "And here is Amber. Amber, your new teacher has come." The girl scanned the guest with a hostile look. "A new teacher? Mum, you're mistaken. We don't have any new teachers." Patricia looked frightened at the guest. "Who are you? Why did you come here?" Amber also stared at Donna with dislike. Donna understood that revealing the whole truth in such a delicate situation was impossible. To ease the tension, she smiled and replied, "You can consider me a good fairy or a guest from the future, whichever you prefer, but I came here to help." Amber looked at her for a long time and then asked in a voice hoarse with emotion, "Is it true that you want to help my mum? You're not lying?" Donna felt her eyes welling up with tears. "Lying to sick people is a crime. I will definitely help your mum." Still looking into her eyes, the girl whispered, "I wrote to someone about our trouble. Did you read that letter?" "Yes, I read your letter and came right away." Amber started crying. The tears of this girl spoke more than any loud promises. Donna silently vowed to do everything possible for these two women. After all, unknowingly, she had stolen their happiness and enjoyed it for almost 15 years. Donna was deeply moved by Patricia's story. On her way home, she thought, "How similar our fates are. I also lost my mother at a young age, and then my father died in an accident. But I was luckier because my grandparents raised me." It surprised Donna that Patrick had never told her he had been married before. The woman felt uncomfortable that only now, after so many years, she'd learnt this fact from her husband's biography. But she didn't know what to do, given the newly discovered circumstances. In this state of uncertainty, she returned home. Patrick and Paul were already there. Upon her arrival, her husband indifferently asked, "Where have you been? We were starting to worry, and were about to file a missing persons report." To this, Donna replied, "Today is my day off, and I decided to get some fresh air." Patrick meaningfully drawled, "Ah, I see. Our mum went shopping?" Donna said nothing and went to the bedroom. She changed clothes and was about to go to the kitchen but stopped. Trying not to make noise, she pulled out a drawer from the stylish dresser and took out an antique box inlaid with colourful stones. This heirloom had been passed down to her from her grandmother, and her grandfather had saved a bit from his pension and salary every month. The man had lectured at the university almost until his death, so he left his granddaughter a considerable sum. Once Donna laughed at him, saying, "Grandpa, serious people keep their savings in the bank." But he had gotten angry. "Maybe I'm not serious in your eyes, but I don't trust banks." Donna had laughed. "What if someone steals your books?" The man had confidently said, "If you keep your mouth shut, no one will steal it, and the money will always be at hand when needed." She and Patrick had also saved a bit in this box at first, but later they only took from it. Donna wanted to count the money, but she heard her husband's demanding voice. "Donna, where are you stuck? Your men are dying of hunger." The woman rushed to the open drawer, but after thinking, decided to change the hiding place and put the box in the far corner of the wardrobe. "This will be safer," she whispered, and went to fulfill her household duties. This time, the night shift was relatively calm. Taking the opportunity, Donna asked the on-duty doctor to spare her a few minutes. The young doctor agreed. "Donna, I am ready to talk to you, even until the end of the shift." Encouraged by his optimism, Donna got straight to the point. "Dr. Keating, my relative is seriously ill, but she has a complicated family situation, so the treatment is not going as well as we would like. Could you look at her medical record? This is from her consultation at the regional hospital a couple of months ago." When Dr. Keating carefully read Patricia's medical record, Donna impatiently asked, "What do you think?" The doctor only sighed. "Unfortunately, I can't say anything reassuring. We need to examine your relative further, and only then can we talk about treatment prospects. Donna, why did this woman let it go? With such a diagnosis, you can't afford to lose even a day, and here 2 months have been lost." Donna sighed regretfully. "The reason is simple. She had no money." Dr. Keating looked at the nurse in surprise. "And now there is?" "Yes, now there is the necessary amount. The question is whether it makes sense to start treatment." Dr. Keating meaningfully raised his index finger. "Colleague, there is always a point, even in the most hopeless situation, and you know this better than I do. Let's agree on this. You bring your relative, and we need to do it as soon as possible. I will arrange a consultation with the best haematologist. He is a friend of my father and my favourite university professor." For the first time in the last 2 very hectic days, Donna relaxed a bit. Now she had to convince Patricia. "I will go to them today," Donna decided. After the night shift, she hurried home, trying not to think about her fatigue. She changed clothes and then took out the precious box, removing almost all its contents. After that, she dialed Patricia's number. "I will be there soon. Prepare everything necessary for the hospital. Today after lunch, an excellent doctor will see you." Patricia tried to object, but Donna cut her off. "Patricia, let's not waste time on empty talk. Besides, your daughter can stay with me while you're at the hospital. No, my husband will not mind. You don't need to worry about that." "Thank you, Donna. You really are like a fairy from a tale." There were sobs heard from Patricia on the phone. Dr. Keating kept his promise and was waiting for them at the entrance to the clinic when the famous haematologist worked. "First, a full diagnosis, and only then will we evaluate our patient's chances," he said, and led the women inside. Patricia looked around fearfully. Seizing a convenient moment, she whispered to Donna, "Maybe it's all for nothing. Maybe we shouldn't spend the money. Such a large amount. I won't be able to pay you back all at once." Donna hugged the unfortunate woman and felt her trembling. "Patricia, right now, your life is the most important thing. And money? It comes and goes. Honestly, I don't mind spending it on a good cause." "And your husband won't scold you?" "No, he won't," Donna confidently replied. Soon, Patricia was called by the nurse from the diagnostic room, and Donna stayed waiting in the corridor. Only in the evening did they get to the consultation with the professor. The medical luminary kept the patient in his office for about an hour and then invited Dr. Keating. Waiting for the doctor's verdict, Patricia trembled with excitement and Donna was exhausted from fatigue and lack of sleep. Finally, Dr. Keating came out of the office. "Professor, will personally take care of your relative, which means she has a chance. Not for a full recovery, but she will be able to enjoy life for another 5 or even 10 years. Donna returned home, tired but almost happy. She thanked fate for allowing her to do another good deed. Especially since she had helped not a stranger, in a way. Donna already imagined how she would soak in the bath and then fall into a sweet sleep. But when she opened the door to her apartment, she realised that besides her husband and son, there was someone else present. This fact was confirmed by a familiar pair of shoes in the hallway and voices coming from the kitchen. Donna listened intently. Again, the devil has brought her here. I'm ready for anything, but I can't stand listening to her empty chatter. At this moment, Patrick peeked out from the kitchen. And here comes our Donna. Lately you've been staying out too late, and it's making me suspicious. Patrick was in a positive mood, but Donna didn't feel like joking. She replied curtly, "Constant suspicion is a bad sign, Patrick. I had to arrange hospital care for an acquaintance, so I was a bit late." Patrick planted a dutiful kiss on his wife's cheek. "You're like Mother Teresa, always helping everyone and taking care of everyone. And here we are, waiting for you, and also counting on your help." Donna followed her husband into the kitchen, and Patrick, with a satisfied smile, noted, "We did a little housekeeping in the kitchen today with Paul. Check out our culinary skills, dear Mrs. Raskin. The dish is simple but very hearty." The pasta and cheese did indeed look very appetizing. Donna's salivary glands went into overdrive, and she greedily dug into the food. Helen couldn't resist the opportunity to mock Donna. "At least chew your food. You know, swallowing like that can lead to an ulcer. You're a medic yourself." Patrick irritably remarked, "Mum, you could have kept quiet, but you just had to put in your 2 cents. He looked pointedly at his mother, and she demonstratively covered her mouth with her hand. "That's it, I'm quiet. Not another word." After satisfying her hunger, Donna looked at her husband and said, "Now we can talk business." Helen opened her mouth, but Patrick gave her a stern look. He sat down next to Donna and put his arm around her waist. "Donna, here's the thing. You know that elderly people always have health issues." Donna nodded. "I know, Patrick. I deal with it every day at work. So let's cut to the chase." Patrick stood up. "All right, I'll be direct. Mum's health is weak. She needs clean air. In the big city, that's a problem, which leads to apathy and insomnia." Donna ironically remarked, "Patrick, I asked you to cut to the chase. How can I help your mum and my dear mother-in-law?" The man leaned against the table, cornering Donna. "Mum has long dreamed of living in the countryside, but buying a dacha requires a substantial amount of money, which Mum doesn't have." Donna laughed. "Patrick, what does that have to do with me?" Irritation was bubbling out of the man, but he restrained himself, understanding that only gentleness would achieve his goal. So he tried to hug his wife again. "Donna, you have that magical box with lots of money. It's just sitting there anyway. And my mum could buy a nice little house with it, and her savings, where we could go every weekend. We've already found a suitable option with Mum. Mum is short half, and we just have that much money in our box. By the way, tomorrow we have a meeting with the seller." "So, you and your mum have already decided everything without me?" Donna freed herself from her husband's embrace and turned to her mother-in-law. "Helen, what about the theatre and your role?" Her mother-in-law beamed with a happy smile. "Donna, one doesn't interfere with the other. It's a 20-minute bus ride from the dacha settlement to the city centre. We have rehearsals 3 times a week, and besides, I don't want to live in the dacha permanently. I'll spend a few days in the city and then go to the dacha. It will be a change of scenery." Donna agreed with a smile. "Yes, you've thought it all out well." Patrick was turning red and pale, a sign that he was losing patience. Donna, can we stop the interrogation? Where is the box? I looked for it, but it's not in its usual place. You hid it and didn't tell me. And why should I tell you? It's my money. My granddad gave them to me, the woman sarcastically asked. Then she disappeared behind the bedroom door and returned a minute later with the box in her hands. Here, Patrick. The man lifted the lid of the pretty casket and was stunned. There's almost nothing in here. Donna, where did you put the money? By this time, Donna was already tired of this circus and replied rather rudely, It's my money, Patrick, and I spent it on what I considered more necessary than buying a dacha for your precious mum. Helen jumped up like she had been stung. Patrick, I don't know how you put up with this. If I were you, I would have kicked this scoundrel out long ago. If she were at least a decent woman. But she's just a nurse. Donna realised that her time had finally come. Trying to keep within the bounds of decency, she said, Helen, this is my apartment, which I had before our marriage, and you won't be able to kick me out like you once did to Patricia, your son's first wife. This time your trick won't work, and you'll have to buy the dacha with your own money. Her mother-in-law began to stutter in indignation. We will go to court to divide the property. Patrick, how can you stand there calmly when your mother is being humiliated? Patrick gave his wife a scorching look. We will talk more, Donna. I'll just see my mum out first. But Donna did not wait for her husband to return. She threw his pillow on the couch in the living room and locked herself in the bedroom. Through her sleep, she heard Patrick banging on the door, but she did not respond to his demands to open it. In the morning, she found her husband in the kitchen. Patrick was in a bad mood. He looked at his wife. Donna, this can't go on. You're right, Patrick. After everything I've found out, I can't live with you any more. The man exploded. What? You want a divorce? I'll make your life hell. You're nobody, a worthless, uneducated creature. If I hadn't married you, you would have ended up with some plumber or truck driver. At this moment, their son Paul interrupted his father's bright monologue. Dad, you would definitely suit Napoleon's hat. He also thought he was exceptional. You're in on this too. Fine, you'll both dance to my tune. The apartment door slammed loudly, and mother and son jumped at the sound. That same evening, Patrick took his things. He expected his wife and son to cry and beg him to stay, but Paul only came out of his room after his father had left. He hugged his mother and said confidently, Mum, don't be upset. Dad will come to his senses and return. Besides, is it true that I have a sort of half-sister? Donna looked at her son in surprise. And how do you know? The boy smiled. Mum, it's the 21st century. Amber and I connected on social media and chatted a bit. She's all right, a sensible girl. It's just a shame that her mum is so sick. By the way, we could all go visit her together. Donna looked tenderly at her son. You're so grown up and kind. Paul smiled. I take after you, Mum. I've already decided that after school, I'll go to medical school. Patrick reminded them of his existence a month after his rash departure. He called his wife in advance. Donna, can I come over? We need to talk. She threw a short, all right. At the appointed time, Patrick arrived, but did not open the door with his key. Instead, he rang the bell. The door was opened by Amber. "Who are you looking for?" The man was taken aback. Seeing an unfamiliar girl in the apartment he had recently considered his own, he challengingly asked, "And who are you? Paul's girlfriend?" The girl smirked. "No, I'm his half-sister. Hi, Dad." Patrick rushed down the stairs, skipping steps. He was badly shaken by the encounter with his past in the form of the daughter he had rejected. The man also remembered the letter in which Amber begged him for help. Fate does not forgive such mistakes, and Patrick paid for his sin. He married 2 more times, but never found happiness. Donna married her colleague a year after the divorce. Patricia's life also improved. After a long treatment, she entered a stage of stable remission. She even got married, but she never forgot whom she should thank for her continued life. Mr. Harwood emerged from his slumber slowly, as if reluctant to return to this world, yearning to stay in the realm of sleep. Outside the window it was overcast, and rain drummed against the glass, bringing sadness and longing. At such moments one feels apathy, especially when unwell and uncertain about surviving until tomorrow. His body refused to cooperate. When he tried to raise his arm, it held no strength, and within minutes it would dangle lifelessly off the bed. Everything had been so different before. Mr. Harwood had always taken care of himself, going for morning jogs year-round, regardless of weather. Hot or cold, what did it matter? After exercising, his body had been filled with vigour, unlike now, when he lay helpless as a vegetable, muscles weak, dependent on a nurse just to sit up. She would help, naturally, but Mr. Harwood had always relied on himself. He couldn't depend on a nurse's care forever. His condition was deteriorating, and he was desperately thirsty for water, nothing else. Mr. Harwood turned his head toward the closed door. The nurse wasn't likely to come soon. Understandably, she was always busy. He often heard the head nurse's voice behind the door. "Hey, when will you disinfect Ward 7? All talk and no action. And help the patient from 5th Ward. He needs to go for an ultrasound." Mr. Harwood knew they meant him, the patient in Ward 5, a 53-year-old businessman surrounded by mysterious sensors and wires. He'd seen similar equipment in movies' intensive care units, but since he was conscious and alert, this must be an ordinary ward. The room's stark whiteness made it difficult to open his eyes fully, but Mr. Harwood hardly cared. What difference would it make? None. A crushing weakness overwhelmed him anew, and Mr. Harwood sensed the end approaching. "I wonder whom she reprimanded so harshly," he mused. "The modest blonde, or the red-head with the difficult temperament?" He didn't know most of the medical staff's names. He just knew one, Gillian, the kindest amongst them. She maintained impeccable politeness and never showed rudeness. However, the patients of the VIP ward were supposed to be well taken care of, so it was expectable. But not everyone behaved like that. Mr. Harwood had a good doctor. Dr. Doggett had been honest with him from day one. "The situation is serious, but don't lose heart. We'll run more tests for a clearer picture. Meanwhile, stay positive, and try not to worry needlessly." Her candour had lifted his spirits. Perhaps the operation could help, he thought, though Annabeth doesn't believe in it, always insisting it's futile. Easy for her to say from outside. True, Annabeth visits, but not as often as she should. Maybe it's the weather. Autumn was in full swing, leaves falling and dancing in intricate patterns. Mr. Harwood reminisced about his morning jogs in the city park. The yellow leaves on the paths had looked so pristine, that stepping on them made him uncomfortable. He wanted to preserve that magical golden pathway untouched. But it was just a dream. Soon enough a janitor would sweep it all away with a few strokes of his broom. In his hospital bed, Mr. Harwood pondered seemingly disconnected thoughts. How long since his son's death? Who would inherit his estate? Who would take over his business? Each question demanded, if not an answer, at least careful consideration. And time he wasn't sure he had. While the businessman contemplated his uncertain future, life continued in the hospital corridor nearby. Head nurse Dana demanded perfect order in everything, though, according to rumours, at the beginning of her career, she was not distinguished by special zeal. The main merit of Dana was her ability to make connections. She would wink at one rich patient, and then she would make up a required document or certificate for another. Well, of course everything was within reasonable limits in accordance with the law. Dana didn't want troubles. Close to the department head, she ruled over the nurses like a queen. She was particularly harsh with Gillian, a sweet, compliant girl who never resisted requests. No one knew why, likely just an instant dislike, common in female workplaces where everything from a hairstyle to a new dress could trigger antipathy. However, Gillian always behaved modestly, tried not to stand out from the crowd, wore simple clothes, and didn't use makeup. Her hair, the colour of ripe wheat, always smelled of herbs and something else. Gillian's partner, Sonia, pondered what this scent reminded her of until she realised it was like strawberries and wild flowers. Not roses, but the kind that grow near rivers, sustained by moisture throughout the summer. She must be using some clever balm or lotion. Look how fragrant it is. And here I buy all the expensive branded products with little effect. Sonia thought enviously, eyeing the young nurse's graceful figure. Truth be told, Sonia had no reason to complain. She was slender and beautiful, though her beauty seemed artificial, like a fashion doll's. Moreover, Sonia was cunning and often tried to push the hardest work onto her colleagues. Now, seizing a moment, she said, "Gillian, take the laundry to the neighbouring building." They mixed everything up again. Sonia's reasoning was simple. She disliked the weather outside, where drizzling rain fell and gusty winds threatened to knock people off their feet. Only janitor Mr. Gish bravely battled the fallen leaves, walking through puddles in his funny rubber overshoes. "All right, I'll handle it soon, but first I need to check on Mr. Harwood in the 5th ward. That businessman might need help," Gillian agreed. Sonia smiled contentedly. Go ahead then. I can't stand that moneybag anyway. The way he looks at me makes my skin crawl." "He's ill and barely leaves his room. What else can you expect?" Gillian objected. Sonia shook her head, indicating she had no desire to discuss such an unpleasant subject. Gillian carefully opened the door and hesitated at the threshold. "Mr. Harwood, may I come in?" The patient noticeably brightened and answered softly, Of course, come in, Gillian. I'd like some water, but I lack the strength to get up. I've been waiting for a nurse, but no one came." Gillian felt embarrassed, having seen Dana in the corridor just 5 minutes ago. "They're busy with rounds coming up, so it's a bit hectic," Gillian replied diplomatically as she poured water from the cooler. "Thank you, Gillian," Mr. Harwood said, his hand trembling as he reached for the glass. The orderly hesitated briefly before helping the exhausted man take a sip. Mr. Harwood felt ashamed of his helplessness, but there was nothing to be done. No one was immune to such circumstances. Yesterday healthy and fine, today unable to get out of bed or quench one's thirst. He looked at the nurse gratefully, tears glistening in his eyes. Gillian understood without words. Some things needed no explanation. She was about to leave when the patient lightly touched her hand. "Gillian, do you have a minute? I need your help." "Of course, I'd be happy to help. Can I get you anything? Should I call a doctor?" Mr. Harwood shook his head. "No, something else. I want to ask you to help me make a will." Gillian turned pale. "A will? What for? I don't know anything about that. Shouldn't you have a lawyer? I'm just an ordinary nurse." The businessman paused, gathering his strength. "No, Gillian, I just need you to write down a simple plan from my words. I have a notebook in my nightstand. You can write everything there. Who gets what? I don't know what tomorrow brings. I've delayed this long enough. I'm afraid of causing trouble." Gillian sighed with relief. "Well, if that's all, I don't mind. It's a bit awkward, but if it's necessary, why not?" Mr. Harwood watched her gratefully. A good girl, always busy like a bee, never resting. Meanwhile, Gillian retrieved a large notebook with tear-off sheets and a fountain pen from the nightstand. A photograph slipped out, a young man standing beside an expensive car. Gillian discreetly glanced at its back, noting the inscription, "From a loving son to a loving father." Embarrassed, she carefully tucked the photo into her notebook. Mr. Harwood closed his eyes, thinking, where to begin? This would be an unusual will. A month ago, he had opened several bank accounts containing substantial sums. They were intended for various people, some unconnected to each other, a friend working as a restaurant administrator, a long-retired schoolteacher, the cemetery caretaker who tended his accident-victim son's grave. The late wife's monument needed attention too. The list was extensive, with amounts varying based on the significance of each deed or other factors. Mr. Harwood did not want to handle such accounting through a notary. Above all, he didn't want his young wife to learn the names of the people he mentioned. Annabeth would already inherit his most valuable possessions in the event of his passing: the business, a 2-story house outside the city, and an elite apartment in the centre with its magnificent city view. There was also his minor stepson, Bruce, but Mr. Harwood had provided for him by opening a savings deposit in his name. By the businessman's calculations, when Bruce came of age, he would be quite wealthy and able to manage the money as he wished. Of course, Mr. Harwood could have asked the notary to do what he was asking Gillian to do, but who could guarantee secrecy? And knowing Annabeth's character, she would certainly make life difficult for those people whom her husband wished to thank in this unusual way. Mr. Harwood had just opened his mouth to tell the nurse the first name when the door of the ward burst open. The businessman looked up to see his wife, accompanied by a bespectacled man around 40, carrying a leather briefcase. Even a child could tell that she had brought a professional with her, likely their family lawyer. "Oh, hi, honey, how are you doing? How are you feeling?" Annabeth asked in an artificially concerned voice. Mr. Harwood was about to answer when his wife cut him off again. "And this is Mr. Blake, darling, notary. You mentioned wanting one, so I took the initiative." Mr. Harwood wrinkled his nose and cast an apologetic look at Gillian. The nurse nodded understandingly and returned the notebook to the nightstand. Annabeth smirked. "That's right, dear. Come back later." Gillian only smiled in response and quietly left the room. What else could she do? Annabeth was his legal wife and could do as she pleased. On the other hand, Gillian was grateful for her for interrupting because she was freed from the uncomfortable task of recording the heirs' names. It wasn't the difficulty that bothered her. She simply couldn't imagine this kind, sweet patient passing away. "Everything will be fine. Mr. Harwood's treatment is going well. Dr. Doggett is a heaven-sent doctor." Gillian reassured herself as she hurried to her next task, delivering laundry to the neighbouring building. Such mix-ups happened occasionally during busy times in their department. The air was crisp outside, typical for mid-October, with a cool wind and overcast skies hinting at the approaching winter. Though the heavy snows were still far off, townspeople had already started bundling up more at night. Mr. Gish, the janitor, seemed unbothered by the weather, standing with his broom like a sentry at his post. Seeing Gillian, he smiled. "Here comes Gillian. Let me help you, dear. That bundle's bigger than you are." "No need, Mr. Gish. I can manage. It's not far," Gillian replied. The janitor shrugged and resumed sweeping, gathering leaves into a pile to bag later for the garbage. Passing Mr. Gish's service space, Gillian heard odd sounds through the half-open door, what seemed like voices, then muffled music. Reading the question in her eyes, the janitor explained sheepishly, "It's a TV, Gillian. I got it from the guard for a few days, in exchange for my chess set." Gillian stared at the elderly man in surprise and set her laundry bundle on the bench. "I can't believe what I'm hearing, Mr. Gish. Didn't you say there was nothing worth watching on TV? Just tearful serials and music shows?" "Yes, I did, but I didn't get this thing for myself," the janitor admitted guiltily. "Then for whom?" The question caught Mr. Gish off guard. His expression showed he hesitated to explain. "I got it for the boy. Well, he's a stray who came to me. Oh, what an awful word. Like he's some stray dog." "Oh, Mr. Gish, he's not a stray. More like a homeless," Gillian corrected with a gentle smile. "That's it exactly, my dear. A homeless waif." I was racking my brain, trying to find the right words, but couldn't manage it. You know how my memory fails me. Got knocked on the head once, and I haven't been the same since. Gillian nodded as she remembered the story. Mr. Gish had come to their clinic 6 months ago with a closed head injury. He had worked as a watchman in a warehouse when, during a robbery, he was struck from behind. He ended up in intensive care with no family to visit him and spent a month in a coma. Keeping someone on life support is both troublesome and costly. The employer had immediately fired Mr. Gish retroactively, claiming they didn't know why he was in the warehouse. When they discovered his suspended criminal record, they dismissed the case entirely, suggesting perhaps he was scouting the place to rob it, or his accomplices had turned on him. Who needs an extra mouth? Mr. Gish's situation was critical. For several days he balanced between life and death. His heart even stopped once, but they managed to resuscitate him. Fortunately, after 6 months, Mr. Gish emerged from the coma, underwent rehabilitation and gradually recovered. When he learned the clinic needed a janitor, Mr. Gish begged for this position and was hired. "Now I protect different treasures, natural ones, trees and bushes. They repay me with golden leaves. Is that not wealth?" Mr. Gish said with a smile, leaning on his shovel. Gillian knew he had always been lonely, and now he had taken in a street boy. "Tommy's over there watching cartoons. Such a wise boy, only 7, but he reasons like an adult. He helped me clean up the leaves the other day. Can you imagine? Worth his weight in gold, that child," Mr. Gish explained when Gillian came to the door. She quietly turned the handle and stepped over the threshold. Warmth and comfort enveloped her. Mr. Gish was skilled in maintaining his space. A young boy sat by a small TV on an old sofa. When he heard the door creak, he turned and met the guest's eyes. At the sight of her uniform, he tensed like a frightened wild animal. "Don't be afraid, Tommy, it's Gillian. She's kind and won't turn you in to anyone." The boy nodded and smiled. "Hi, buddy. How do you like the cartoons?" she asked gently. "They're good, but I prefer watching superheroes," the boy replied softly. Gillian smiled mysteriously. "I know them well. Tell me, would you like to become one of them?" Tommy looked surprised. "Is that possible? Of course I want to." Gillian laughed, then added, "But if you want to become strong, you need to eat well. You're so thin." Tommy lowered his eyes. "I'm not thin. I'm just growing in the sky direction." Gillian smiled. "All right, don't worry. I'll take the laundry and run to the store. Just wait here, okay? Don't leave." "All right, Gillian, I'll wait," the boy answered. Meanwhile, Mr. Harwood, fighting through his pain, was discussing his will with his young wife. "Darling, you understand, don't you? We shouldn't delay this. A will is an official document. It would give me and my son peace of mind," Annabeth declared, unbothered by the notary's presence. Mr. Harwood's face turned pale as snow. "I remember everything, Annabeth. Of course I do. I just wanted to collect my thoughts and make a rough plan." "Oh, is that all? You could have said so earlier. Here, I've been running around worried like a fool," she said, pursing her lips resentfully. Mr. Blake, the notary, present for the conversation, coughed discreetly, suggesting they should proceed with business. "Darling, let's handle the business matters first. The house isn't going anywhere. It'll be Bruce's family home when he grows up. But the car dealership and specialised workshops need your attention now," Annabeth persisted. Yet the businessman hesitated about making his will. Initially, he wanted to cite weakness and poor health, but Annabeth was really insisting, and her arguments were compelling. "Mr. Harwood, this isn't just for me. Do you want competitors taking over the business? They're not wasting any time, you know." The sick man nodded wearily. "Fine, I'll sign it. But that's all for today, agreed? The real estate and car can wait, okay?" Annabeth's eyes brightened. "Of course, honey. Whatever you say. Just sign right here and here. That's all." Mr. Harwood, with a weakening hand, signed the document and leaned back on the pillow with relief. His head was spinning, and his throat felt as dry as if he had walked through a scorching desert for hours. For Annabeth, however, it was a moment of triumph. When she left her husband's room, she gave the head nurse an approving look and slammed the door behind her. Joyfully waving her elegant handbag, she headed for her car in the parking lot. The notary followed obediently like a puppet on strings. Such compliance usually stemmed from either fear or an impressive sum of money. In this case, the latter, because Annabeth had long been preparing to force her husband to make a will. Being older, Mr. Harwood understood his wife's interest. After all, who wouldn't want to inherit a business that brought stable income? And Annabeth had succeeded, aided by favourable circumstances, namely the death of Mr. Harwood's son Mitch several years ago. Annabeth had never known Mitch personally, seeing him only in photographs. According to her husband, his son had lived life to the fullest, actively pursuing sports, skydiving, and following a vegetarian diet. But Mitch's greatest passion was fast driving, not in the city streets, but on open highways, where the wind against the windshield made his heart race with adrenaline. Mr. Harwood had begged his son not to take unnecessary risks, but for Mitch, risk was like salt to food, essential. When Mr. Harwood urged him to think about starting a family, Mitch would dismiss it. "I'll get there, Dad. What's the hurry? I haven't had my fill of life yet. When I settle down, then I'll start a family." Mr. Harwood would just shake his head. What could he say? His son was an adult who would make his own choices. For Mitch's birthday, the businessman gave him a new car, an exclusive model, unlike his son had owned before. Despite appreciating the gift, Mitch still fought with his father that night. Mr. Harwood had raised the boy alone after his mother's death when Mitch was 3. Though he knew he couldn't provide all the warmth and attention his son craved, he had ensured Mitch had the best nannies and tutors for a proper upbringing and education. But somewhere the businessman's careful plan developed a crack. Mitch grew increasingly independent, which ultimately shaped his character. The final argument erupted unexpected. Mitch, quick to anger, accused his father of the indifference that had driven to death his mother. These words left Mr. Harwood breathless. Like any father, he had dreamed his son would become his pride and support, but everything had turned out differently. Tears welled in Mr. Harwood's eyes as his son slammed the door and stormed out. Mitch got behind the wheel of his new car and gunned the engine. An hour later, Mr. Harwood learned from the news that his son had died after driving off a bridge into the river. The body wasn't found initially, and Mr. Harwood clung to hope that his son had survived. But search teams and divers shook their heads grimly, saying survival was impossible. Mr. Harwood held on to his faith and hope until Mitch was found. The river had carried his body downstream, where local fishermen discovered it. Even then, Mr. Harwood insisted it must be a mistake. Surely the investigation was wrong. It couldn't be his son. No, no, no. But when the businessman went to the morgue for identification, reality crashed down. There lay Mitch, looking just as he had in life. Mr. Harwood's tears told the pathologist all he needed to know. 8 years had passed since then, and Mr. Harwood had begun living with Annabeth only 4 years ago. What did he have to lose? Continue living alone into old age? Who would care for him then? Who would offer comfort and kind words? So Annabeth entered Mr. Harwood's life, a seemingly sweet, kind woman raising her son Bruce alone. Initially, she appeared genuine, honest, beautiful, faithful. Mr. Harwood had always known how to court elegantly, surrounding his chosen one with attention and care from the start. Pleasant surprises, expensive gifts, and enormous bouquets of roses created a daily whirlwind of luxury and affection. Such devotion was difficult to resist. Colleagues and business partners unanimously urged Mr. Harwood to draft a prenuptial agreement. The businessman would nod in agreement, only to lose himself in his woman's green eyes. His acquaintances could only shake their heads, seeing the couple's fate sealed by their 17-year age gap. Mr. Harwood understood friction would arise, as their differing viewpoints had already surfaced. Arguments frequently centred on the strained relationship between Mr. Harwood and his stepson Bruce, who inexplicably avoided his stepfather as if fearing harm from him. After the wedding, Annabeth transformed too, growing imperious and arrogant. Initially, Mr. Harwood had found this change intriguing, but when he discovered signs of a serious illness, he realised his mistake. Then again, his life hadn't been particularly joyful before. Endless work and mental strain, all to amass wealth and achieve financial independence. And now what? The time had come, and he didn't know what to do with the money. Sighing sadly, Mr. Harwood struggled to reach the nightstand, to take out a notebook and make the necessary notes himself. What if he didn't have time? The doctor had assured him there was still time, but it was better to be prepared, to stay one step ahead, especially since sleep would be impossible anyway. Annabeth, on the other hand, was ecstatic. It was no small feat. She had succeeded beyond belief. Her stubborn husband had finally made a will, which meant she could share the news with her closest confidant, the man who had been replacing her husband for months. After dropping the lawyer at the notary's office, she pulled out her cell phone and dialed the number she knew by heart. "Hello, honey. You can congratulate me, Tom. Yes, I'm the rightful heiress. True, it's only on paper for now, but it's just a matter of time. My hubby has his operation tomorrow. I've talked to the right person and found out all the ins and outs." "Who?" "The head nurse. She says my husband is doomed. He's a vegetable. Even if he survives, he won't be able to run the business because most likely he'll be incapacitated." Chuck snorted triumphantly and ended the call. It wasn't by chance he met this Annabeth. She's that kind of woman, ready for fire or flood, and most importantly, Chuck himself stays in the shadows while his mistress does all the work. She'll go to any length for her husband's inheritance. Meanwhile, Chuck had a more delicate task, taking over the Harwood family business. Annabeth had no idea her lover was actually an agent for a criminal group that specialised in seizing established businesses from vulnerable owners. Chuck's arsenal of tools was extensive, from anonymous letters and phone blackmail to arson and vehicle vandalism. Of course, any genuine relationship with Annabeth was out of the question. Chuck's plan was simple. She would inherit and give him partial control of the business shares. For an experienced womanizer with his background, it was trivial. If everything went smoothly, he'd receive his percentage from his employers. Then he could forget about Annabeth and her morose son like a bad dream. But Annabeth knew none of this, and continued making her grand plans of getting rich in the immediate future and enjoying her lover's embraces. Meanwhile, Gillian, after delivering laundry, went to the store as promised to buy treats for Tommy. The saleswoman greeted her with surprise. "Gillian, since when do you buy drinks and sweets? Usually only Sonia and a couple of nurses from your department come in. Don't misunderstand. I'm happy to help a good person. I'm just curious." Gillian smiled sheepishly. "They're not for me. They're for a little boy, about 7 years old. Mr. Gish took him in. He's watching cartoons in his room. He must be hungry. You know Mr. Gish doesn't have much money." The saleswoman nodded sympathetically. "I know, dear. Mr. Gish is a clever man. The yard became spotless as soon as he took over." Gillian sighed and studied the pastry in the display case. Soon she left the shop with a bag of fresh pastries, milk chocolate, and a carton of milkshake. Tommy waited impatiently. After handing the child his treats, Gillian winked at the janitor, suggesting they step outside for fresh air and talk. After a moment's hesitation, she asked that had bothered her since meeting the boy. "Listen, Mr. Gish, how did you meet Tommy? Did he have relatives in the hospital?" The janitor shifted uncomfortably, glanced around and spoke quietly. "Well, you see, Gillian, I've been secretly feeding the stray dogs behind the ambulance station garages. It started with Alf, a dog whose owner died in surgery. It was a hopeless case, but worth trying. Poor Alf grieved for 3 days, sitting and staring at the hospital windows. The nurses told me later that his master was moved 3 times between rooms before ending up in intensive care, in an entirely different building, mind you. Somehow that dog found his master's window every time. I don't know how he did it. He'd sit there for hours in the summer heat until he got heat stroke. Yes, dear, dogs get that too. The poor thing overheated, collapsed and started convulsing. I didn't think Alf would make it. I took him home, nursed him with broth, and saved him. While Alf was recovering, they buried his owner, and the dog has been my friend ever since." Gillian looked at Mr. Gish in bewilderment, still not understanding what could be the connection between the stray dog and Tommy. Having read the question in her eyes, he shook his head and continued, "Don't be angry, my dear, that I started with Alf. Well, from afar, I mean. I can't tell a short story, no matter how hard I try. I'll try to keep it brief, Gillian. Alf started coming to me during my shifts. I can't take him to my place. I live in a hostel. Barely have enough space myself. Where else could I put the dog? The neighbours wouldn't understand. They'd get angry, and I don't need scandals, you know. So Alf started coming to me here, but not alone." "What do you mean, Mr. Gish?" Gillian couldn't help asking. Mr. Gish smiled. "Well, just like that, my dear. He began bringing his vagabond friends. First Countess, a lame sheepdog, then Charlie, a great mongrel. He could eat a whole loaf of bread in one sitting. And then there's Bagel and Jack. All in all, a small pack. I can't feed them bones and meat trimmings every day. Such a feast comes once a week, not more often. I dry breadcrumbs for them and boil porridge on my hot stove. You should see how they gobble it up. In no time the bowls are empty and don't need washing. They even shine like new. Recently I went out to feed the dogs some breadcrumbs. I gave one his portion, when suddenly I heard a child's voice, thin and pitiful. 'Give me a breadcrumb, uncle?' I jumped in surprise. There was a little boy standing among the dogs, like Mowgli. God forbid. So I took him by the hand to my service place where it's warm. That's how I met Tommy.
and now I don't know what to do."
At this point the old man deliberately paused to let Gillian process what he had said. "What a story!" Gillian exclaimed, and then asked, "But what about his parents? Father, mother or grandmother? Isn't anyone alive?" The elderly janitor glanced anxiously at the building door before saying,
"Tommy says he barely remembers his mother, true or not, but she died in childbirth. He lives with his stepfather, an alcoholic who drinks away the boy's allowance, leaving his stepson hungry. That's why Tommy avoids home, to not see his stepfather."
Gillian's cheeks flushed with indignation. "How can this be? There are services for this, social workers, child protection. We should report this scoundrel to the authorities and make his life miserable. This is outrageous. A boy begging for food in the street, while some thug lives off his allowance." Mr. Gish nodded in agreement.
"You're right, my dear. I'll help you if needed. I won't stand aside, but we'll need time for the proceedings. Where will he live meanwhile? I can't take him in."
Gillian pondered briefly, though the decision came instantly. "Let him stay with me for now. My house is small, but it's warm and dry. He can stay with you until the end of your shift, all right?" Mr. Gish looked at the nurse gratefully.
"Thank you, Sunshine. I'll be forever grateful."
Gillian smiled and hurried to the clinic, noticing that the head nurse was watching her closely from the window. The moment she opened the door, her boss confronted her.
"Where have you been, Gillian?
You went for laundry and disappeared. Stop these games. I won't tolerate it. If you don't want to work, just say so, instead of standing there making eyes at our janitor." Gillian's indignation left her breathless. "How can you say that? What eyes?" Dana sneered. "The same ones you made at that businessman? What do they see in you?" "I don't understand what you're implying, Dana," Gillian mumbled, embarrassed. The head nurse regarded her subordinate with obvious disapproval. "Oh, she doesn't understand. That businessman took ill after you left, but he left you a note. He was practically choking as he handed it to me, saying, 'Give this to Gillian, I beg you.' I can barely understand it. What a disgrace and unprofessional behaviour, Gillian." A question formed in Gillian's eyes. "The note, where is it?" "Did Mr. Harwood leave it for me?" Gillian asked, overcoming her natural shyness. Dana wrinkled her nose.
"You're so tiresome, Gillian. Do you think I'd bother keeping those scribbles? I threw it in the trash. Nothing important. If you must, go look for it yourself, and stop frowning. Come to work on time, and you won't have to dig through garbage."
"How is Mr. Harwood now? Is he feeling better?" Gillian redirected the conversation.
"Better? Gillian, are you even listening? I told you he felt worse, and after Dr. Doggett examined him, she sent him to surgery. Well, she knows best. She's the doctor after all," the head nurse said with arrogance.
Realizing that the conversation was over, Gillian went to the ward and began her usual routine work. The thought that Dana had thrown the note into the waste basket wouldn't leave her mind. My God, why did she do that? Couldn't she have handed it directly to me? Though, what's to be surprised about? She doesn't care about me. She even hates me, Gillian thought while mopping the floor. At that moment, she realized that Mr. Harwood had left the note for a reason, and she had to find it at all costs. But which wastebasket had Dana thrown the crumpled sheet into? Deciding to search the garbage can next to the head nurse's room first, Gillian stealthily began her inspection. And while she was doing this, the head nurse was furtively watching her through the crack in the door, smiling smugly. I really fooled that simpleton. Did I read the note? Of course I did. I studied it immediately, and sent it to Annabeth in a message. You think I get money from her regularly, and keep an eye on her husband's condition for nothing? Meanwhile, Gillian, unaware of all this, diligently searched all the garbage cans but found nothing. The truth was that Dana had burned the piece of paper containing the safe deposit box code. When Annabeth got the message with cherished numbers, she felt joyful excitement. Now that's something. What an old fool! He's standing at death's door himself, but still playing with codes like a spy. Did you think I didn't know about that nurse? But I do, you old miser." The news of the secret safe deposit box delighted her lover Chuck too. "What a nice bonus on top of my fee. We'll split everything and then I disappear. Thank you for your attention and love, Annabeth. This has been quite an adventure," thought the young scoundrel on his way to the bank. Annabeth wanted to shout her triumph to the world. There must be a fortune inside this bank deposit box, perhaps even jewellery. Ah, how it's wonderful to be the lucky one. When Annabeth arrived at the bank, introducing Chuck as her bodyguard, the bank clerk graciously accepted the woman's request and offered to escort them to the vault personally. "Mr. Skinner, do you have a bag for the money? We can't exactly walk around with millions in plain sight, can we?" Annabeth asked with a soft giggle. The banker raised an eyebrow. "We can arrange that if necessary. We can even provide a car and security guard. It's all included in the service for our deposit box holders." The journey to the safe deposit vault seemed endless to Annabeth. Stairs, turns, doors, and more stairs. Finally they arrived. Mr. Skinner verified the information and, after a brief pause, placed an oblong box made of fireproof steel before them. "Is that all?" Chuck blurted out, trying to guess by sight how much money the makeshift box might contain. "Well, yes. What else have you been waiting for?" the banker wondered. "No, that's fine. Just open it quickly," Annabeth said impatiently. Mr. Skinner smiled knowingly. "It opens quite simply by removing the lid, just like a regular jewellery box, only without hinges or clasps. Shall I step out? That's the protocol." Chuck lunged for the box and, nearly breaking his fingernails, threw off the lid. The lovers peered inside eagerly, barely suppressing their shocked gasps. The box was empty, or nearly empty, save for a heavy paper envelope at the bottom. "He must have put a bank card in there, probably unlimited or something," Annabeth whispered as she tore open the envelope. But there were no bank cards or account details inside. Instead, the envelope contained Mr. Harwood's torn will and a crumpled piece of paper with a boldly drawn middle finger, that universally understood gesture that needed no explanation. A heavy silence fell over the room until the clerk politely asked, "Will you be requiring that car with security?" Annabeth shot him a venomous look before breaking into sobs. Once again, her cunning, far-sighted husband had outmanoeuvred her. Having calculated everything in advance, Mr. Harwood played on the greed of the head nurse, who would surely pass the note to his unfaithful wife. The businessman had long suspected Annabeth's infidelity, but lacked concrete evidence. When she began insisting on drawing up a will during his illness, everything became clear. Now, lying on the operating table, he drifted gently into sleep under the carefully measured dose of anesthesia. Meanwhile, Gillian, unaware of all this, had firmly resolved to adopt Tommy at any cost. That evening she visited the boy's stepfather, but he merely laughed, revelling in his power. Tears glistened in Gillian's eyes. What could she do against this burly, tattooed man? Tommy's cries for help went unanswered, as neighbours hid in their homes, fearing retaliation. "Had enough? Now get out of here," growled the villain. What the brute hadn't counted on was faithful Alf and his pack following Gillian and their new friend. The Charlie, the Countess, and a half of a dozen angry dogs quickly turned to the tables, chasing the wretch up a tree with skilled paws and other means best left unmentioned. After dealing with the offender, the dogs rushed to shower the boy with affectionate licks. Stop! Stop! It tickles!" Tommy laughed joyfully. Just then a photograph slipped from his jacket's left pocket. Gillian picked it up and froze. It showed a pleasant-looking young man in his 20s, standing before a luxury car. His face seemed oddly familiar. "That's my daddy.
"I found that picture in Mum's belongings," Tommy explained, noticing Gillian's surprised look. Gillian gasped as recognition struck. "I've seen this in Mr. Harwood's notebook. Could this be Mitch Harwood, Tommy's real father?" she wondered. The answer wouldn't come that evening, nor even that week. The entire truth took a month to unravel, revealing many surprises along the way. Mitch Harwood had been involved with Julia, an orphan, shortly before his death in a car accident. She discovered her pregnancy only after his death. Without knowing his family, Julia resolved to raise the child alone, but life proved harsher than the naive orphanage graduate had imagined. Fate led her to David, another former orphanage resident who had graduated 3 years earlier. Believing his persuading and lies, she agreed to let him be her son's father. The rest is known. Julia died in childbirth, leaving her son with only a photo of his father. Mr. Hayward lay weeping on the couch as he beheld the miniature version of his son, holding Nurse Gillian's hand. The private detective, clutching his investigation files, stood awkwardly aside. Annabeth and her lover, Chuck's timely exposure, left them destitute. Overnight, they lost their support, jobs, and influential connections. But for the once doomed businessman, everything changed. The successful operation and finding his grandson kindled new hope on his horizon, giving him fresh energy and motivation. "Welcome, my grandson. We'll never be apart again," he whispered through tears to Tommy. Gillian stepped aside shyly, where Private Detective Michael took her hand with meaningful intent. Their close collaboration during the investigation had blossomed into mutual attraction. Mr. Hayward smiled at the pair. "Well, my dears, will you let this old man dance at your wedding, or am I already past my prime?" The young nurse giggled shyly, giving her fiancé his cue. "Of course you'll dance, Mr. Harwood. And what old man are you? You've got your whole life ahead. This is just the beginning," Michael replied eagerly. The businessman smiled fondly at Gillian, whom he'd come to see as a daughter. How could it be otherwise? Through her help, he had found the grandson he'd longed for all these years.